In the divine realm, everyone had gathered inside the arena, their eyes fixed on the center of the stage. A human who possessed power surpassing even the gods was introduced. He was also the strongest hero in Greek mythology. They were witnessing the God King selection ceremony. To choose the divine realm's new ruler, every god and hero had gathered under one roof to cast their vote. At the center of the arena, a powerful figure raised his club. Then, he slammed it into the ground. Lightning crackled violently around his body. The host introduced him as the legendary demigod and great hero, Hercules. He stood proudly as the announcer declared the start of the voting. Would the hero who conquered the 12 labors and ascended to godhood become the next god king? Everyone who recognized Hercules as their king was ordered to raise their hands, but the result instantly wiped the confidence from Hercules' face. Honestly, it was completely predictable. The ceremony was supposed to determine the God King through a simple majority vote. However, those who believed they deserved the throne would never vote for someone else. And so, this pointless debate had dragged on for nearly 300 years. The host announced that Hercules had been unanimously rejected. Inside the VIP area, a silver-haired child muttered that they would never settle the matter at this rate. He was Zeus, the current God King, and he was already bored out of his mind. He wanted something more exciting, so he asked the secretary beside him if she had any ideas. She suggested settling it through a tournament, just like last time. But Zeus found repeating the same event twice boring. Besides, if they only needed to test everyone's strength, he could simply kill them all himself. His secretary stared at him in disgust. First, he had suddenly announced that he was giving up the throne, and now he was using the entire selection ceremony as nothing more than entertainment to kill time. She told him they needed to hurry and finish the selection. While the gods wasted their time arguing, a calamity had already appeared in the lower world. Zeus asked what she was talking about since he had already forgotten. She reminded him about the gate. In the human world, the gate suddenly appeared. Without any warning, it brought destruction on a massive scale. It manifested in the human world completely out of nowhere. And while humanity struggled to understand what was happening, the gate unleashed an army of monsters. Goblins poured out. They attacked the humans and trampled everything in their path. Humanity soon gave a name to the gate that had brought this world-ending calamity. They called it the Gate of Demise, Ragnarok. And the situation was only growing worse. Zeus couldn't care less. He simply asked if humanity still hadn't gone extinct before praising them for working so hard. Then, an idea suddenly crossed his mind. He proudly announced that he had thought of something interesting. Whoever formed a contract with a human and resolved the Gate of Demise would become the next God King. His secretary was stunned by the proposal. However, Zeus loved the idea because partnering with a human would act as a handicap. To him, this was the perfect game. The gods could cooperate with the other candidates or simply kill them all. Either way, whoever stopped the Gate of Demise and saved humanity would become the next God King. Zeus excitedly announced the beginning of a battle royale where gods and heroes would team up with humans 10 years later in the human world. A student threw a cup of juice at another student while yelling at him for being late. He ordered him to stop wasting time since the sun was already about to set. The poor student could only apologize. The bully complained that he had gone out of his way to train him, yet he was still completely useless. Suddenly, the area behind them erupted in flames. They spotted a massive creature. It was a giant insect-type monster that hunted humans. But before it could attack, its entire body suddenly burst into flames. A man stood nearby, commanding the fire. He was Yuzuki Kamio, the 5th-ranked S-class hunter contracted with the sun god Ra. The surrounding people erupted in cheers. The bullies, however, looked annoyed. They hated being compared to an outlier like Yuzuki simply because they belonged to the same generation. They complained that hunters contracted with main god-class deities were seriously unfair. They turned toward the person they were bullying and asked if he agreed. Mockingly, they called him the Other One. This poor guy was Hinata Kamio, Yuzuki's older brother. Unlike his younger brother, Hinata was only an F-class logistics supporter without a contractor. While flying above them, Yuzuki noticed what was happening. His expression immediately darkened. The bully grabbed Hinata by the hair and questioned whether they were truly brothers. One was a next-generation hero, while the other was nothing more than an errand boy. Another bully added that Hinata was only an F rank without a contractor, making his situation even more pathetic. The other declared that if he were in Hinata's position, he would quit being a hunter on the spot. Then, a voice interrupted them, and remarked that they seemed to be having fun. It was Yuzuki, now back in his human form. With a cold smile, he asked if they would let him join their little game. The bullies immediately scurried away. Hinata quietly thanked his brother. Yuzuki told him that if he hated being treated that way, he needed to speak up. Otherwise, people would keep walking all over him. Without warning, Yuzuki kicked Hinata in the stomach. The impact made Hinata cough up blood. Yuzuki coldly declared that he was the only one allowed to bully him. While Hinata lay helplessly on the ground, Yuzuki repeatedly kicked him and mocked him for being so miserably weak. Hinata couldn't even protect himself. Yuzuki claimed that he understood exactly how that felt. Meanwhile, someone silently watched them from a nearby rooftop. Yuzuki added that being weak was incredibly frustrating. Hinata told Yuzuki to enjoy being the one looking down on him while he still could. Because if things had happened the way they were supposed to, Hinata would have received that power instead. This instantly enraged Yuzuki. He warned Hinata never to bring up that subject again. Just a little flashback. When they were children, their positions had been completely reversed. Hinata was the fast one, always leaving the slower Yuzuki behind. Back then, Hinata believed they were the happiest and most blessed family in the world. He truly believed nothing could ever change that. Whenever he earned another perfect score, his parents looked at him with pride. They praised him for doing so well, but Yuzuki could never share in their happiness. Whenever he saw them celebrating Hinata's success, he quietly hid his own scores. Their father comforted him, promising that he would catch up soon since the two of them were twins. However, Hinata eventually realized that Yuzuki had been hiding very different feelings all along. Even so, the young Hinata noticed that Yuzuki had received a good score in math, but before they could celebrate, a monster suddenly appeared outside their window. It immediately attacked, forcing their mother to shield Hinata with her body. Meanwhile, their father protected Yuzuki from the falling debris. The monster tore their home apart. Their mother became trapped beneath the rubble as a wall of fire separated her from everyone else, but Hinata refused to abandon her. He charged straight through the flames to save his mother. From above, the sun god Ra witnessed Hinata fearlessly leap into the fire. Hinata's mother desperately told him to run, but he refused to leave without helping her. Suddenly, a massive crack spread across the ceiling. His mother immediately noticed it. With her remaining strength, she pushed Hinata away. Then, the entire ceiling collapsed on top of her. Watching his mother disappear beneath the rubble caused Hinata to burst into tears. Meanwhile, Yuzuki stood outside and watched their entire home become engulfed in flames. Their father had also been buried beneath the debris. Suddenly, someone approached Yuzuki. The stranger claimed that he had witnessed Yuzuki's bravery and had been searching for someone like him for a very long time. It was the sun god Ra. He mistakenly believed Yuzuki was the fearless child who had charged into the hellfire. Yuzuki stood frozen in disbelief as the sun god Ra offered him a contract. Yuzuki accepted the offer. Just then, Hinata came running out of the burning house. But by the time he arrived, the contract had already been completed. The sun god Ra froze when he saw another human and realized that he might have mistaken Yuzuki for Hinata. Meanwhile, Hinata desperately asked Yuzuki where their father was. Yuzuki responded with a twisted grin as flames gathered around his body. His power suddenly erupted as he screamed at Hinata not to touch him. The explosion sent Hinata flying into a wall. Confused and hurt, Hinata asked why he had attacked him. Yuzuki believed that Hinata had always looked down on him for being the inferior younger brother. He bitterly claimed that his big brother had only been lucky. But now, Yuzuki was the one chosen by a god. He immediately unleashed all his bottled-up anger on Hinata. A powerful beam of fire blasted his older brother away. Hinata collapsed helplessly onto the ground. Yuzuki declared that it was finally his turn to look down on him. Back in the present, the sun god Ra, one of the main gods of Egyptian mythology, revealed himself. Without the slightest shame, he casually admitted that he had made a mistake that day and mistaken Yuzuki for Hinata. He explained that he could barely tell humans apart and had never expected the two boys to be twins. Hinata couldn't understand how Ra could still laugh about it. He demanded to know if the god truly felt no regret. After all, Yuzuki had used Ra's power to hurt people like him. But the sun god Ra answered without hesitation that he regretted nothing. Hinata was left completely dumbstruck. Ra explained that siblings trying to kill each other was hardly unusual. Even the members of his own family were constantly at each other's throats. He claimed that modern humans cared far too much about family bonds and couldn't accomplish anything without clinging to one another. In that regard, Yuzuki was different. His ruthlessness made him a natural warrior, his combat instincts were top-notch, and above all, their compatibility was exceptional. Ra couldn't have asked for a better partner than Yuzuki in this era. Yuzuki stared down at Hinata with a smug expression. He called his older brother a useless bastard. Then, he slammed another powerful kick into him. Afterward, Yuzuki turned to leave. Ra asked if he had another mission, and Yuzuki explained that headquarters had issued an urgent request after another creature appeared nearby. Hinata could only watch Yuzuki and the sun god Ra disappear into the distance. Then, his consciousness completely faded. By the time he came around, night had already fallen. Hinata slowly opened his eyes. He was still lying on the same street, and every part of his body ached. He wondered how long he had been unconscious. Our protagonist could barely stand. Since the day they lost their parents, Yuzuki had grown increasingly cruel and tyrannical. But Hinata was the only person in the world who knew his brother's true nature. Whenever Yuzuki stood beneath the cheers of the crowd, Hinata couldn't stop one dark thought from entering his mind. Their parents shouldn't have been the ones who died that day. He wished Yuzuki had died instead. Suddenly, a massive explosion shook the area. Hinata looked up in shock. Yuzuki had been blasted through the air and landed nearby. This good-for-nothing was completely unconscious. Hinata wondered what could have defeated him. Suddenly, something flew toward them from behind. Hinata spun around in alarm. Standing before him was an S-class Undine, a creature capable of completely nullifying flame-based attacks. Fortunately, it hadn't noticed him yet. Hinata planned to grab Yuzuki and escape before it did. He quietly urged his unconscious brother to run. But then, a dark thought crossed his mind. He considered abandoning Yuzuki. Perhaps his rock-bottom life would finally improve without his brother around. Hinata seriously thought about it, until a mysterious voice asked why he was struggling so much with the decision. Hinata froze when he realized that someone was speaking directly into his mind. The voice called this the perfect chance to settle all his grudges. Hinata only needed to pretend that he hadn't seen anything. Confused, Hinata demanded to know who was speaking and whether he was a hero or a god. The mysterious person replied that his identity didn't matter. He pointed out that Hinata envied Yuzuki, saw him as an eyesore, and had wished countless times for him to disappear. Now that wish would come true if Hinata simply walked away. Our protagonist found himself trapped between hatred and guilt. The voice asked what he would choose. He could run and live, or fight and die. Hinata knew that if he abandoned Yuzuki, he could finally live without constantly being compared to him. But then he remembered his mother's final words. She had entrusted Yuzuki to him. Without warning, Hinata punched himself in the face. The pain instantly snapped him back to his senses. He cursed himself for even considering it before charging straight toward the Undine. No matter how much they hated each other, Hinata was still Yuzuki's big brother, and he refused to abandon him. The mysterious person called Hinata a fool, claiming there was a limit to how selfless someone should be. But he also found Hinata's decision noble. Pleased by what he had witnessed, the voice urged Hinata to form a contract with him. Hinata again demanded to know his identity, but the stranger asked if this was really the time to worry about that. The Undine had already formed several water balls around itself. It launched them without warning, forcing Hinata to grab Yuzuki and desperately dodge. Both brothers crashed hard onto the pavement. The attack struck the ground and left behind a massive crater. The mysterious person told Hinata that if his desire to protect his brother was genuine, he needed to scream from the bottom of his soul. His playful voice suddenly turned deadly serious. He warned Hinata that he would never forgive him if his resolve turned out to be a disappointment. Hinata drew in a deep breath. Then he screamed, "Black Blade Shadow Stitch!" Dark shadows instantly enveloped his body. The Undine was caught completely off guard. It immediately fired several water beams. but the shadows wrapped around Hinata, forming a spherical barrier. Hinata sliced straight through it. Then he parried the incoming water attacks. His eyes remained locked on the enemy. He wasn't a god, nor was he a hero. Even so, Hinata continued evading the relentless attacks while closing the distance between himself and the Undine. He unleashed every ounce of his newfound power. Then, he repeatedly slashed across the creature's body and beneath the dark night sky. The S-class Undine was torn to pieces. Driven by his desire to protect someone precious to him, Hinata never backed down. The Undine's water-like body was sliced apart. Hinata couldn't believe that he had defeated an S-class creature when he was only an F-class hunter. Then, he suddenly remembered Yuzuki. He rushed over to check if his brother was okay. Hinata carefully checked his breathing, and he sighed in relief when he realized Yuzuki was still alive. But suddenly, the Undine's severed body began reforming. Hinata stared in disbelief as the creature returned to life. Worse, he could no longer move properly. He had completely forgotten how he had used that attack. The Undine immediately attacked again. One blast grazed Hinata's cheek before blowing apart the wall behind him. In the blink of an eye, the Undine formed several more water beams. It rained them down on Hinata, forcing him to block with his sword while shielding his unconscious brother. The attacks were too fast and he couldn't predict their paths. Hinata screamed into the air, demanding to know how he could use that power again. The silence only made him angrier. He reminded the mysterious person that they had already formed a contract. Suddenly, a water blast struck Hinata directly in the torso. The impact made him cough up blood. The situation had become desperate. Hinata crouched helplessly on the ground, knowing that both brothers would die if this continued. On the other hand, the monster seemed to be enjoying this scene. Another attack slammed into him, and he collapsed beside Yuzuki. Hinata looked at his unconscious brother, but even then his determination to save him never faded. He forced his battered body to stand again. The thought of protecting Yuzuki caused his heart to tighten. Then, Hinata sensed something he couldn't understand. Dark shadows surged from his body, his eyes rolled back, an overwhelming power coursed through him. The Undine prepared another deadly attack. Then, it unleashed a massive water beam. But Hinata no longer looked like himself. He calmly stood his ground and waited for the attack. As the beam closed in, he raised his sword into the air. Then, he sliced the massive water beam cleanly in half, and the same slash tore straight through the Undine's body. The Undine's body completely dispersed, and its core shattered into pieces. Then, Hinata turned toward Yuzuki. He slowly approached his unconscious brother, and with a devilish grin spreading across his face, he raised his sword and targeted him. Suddenly, someone rushed toward them and blasted Hinata away. Hinata slammed into a nearby wall. The newcomer was Minato Izayoi, the rank 1 S-class hunter. While still on the phone, he reported that he had encountered an unknown elite while rescuing Yuzuki. The person on the other end sounded troubled and warned Minato not to cause any problems, but as Hinata rose from the rubble, Minato realized he couldn't make that promise. Hinata's body suddenly released a terrifying force. Then he charged straight at Minato. Minato noticed that Hinata's sword had grown larger. He charged forward as well and asked if Hinata knew who he was. After all, Minato was a pretty famous guy. But Hinata ignored the question and attacked without hesitation. Minato quickly realized that Hinata wasn't listening to a single word. He warned Hinata that anything he did next would count as self-defense. Then, Minato struck him with a powerful bolt of lightning. Hinata instantly lost consciousness. The following morning, Minato happily greeted him. Hinata was still on the same street, but someone had already treated his wounds. He was shocked to see Minato Izayoi, the rank 1 S-class hunter. Meanwhile, Minato had already discovered Hinata's identity. Hinata immediately asked if Yuzuki was safe. Minato assured him that with help from their medical team, Yuzuki would recover in no time. Minato explained that he had researched Hinata while he was unconscious, but found no records of him being an elite. In other words, Hinata was a complete newbie who had only recently formed a contract. He asked which deity Hinata had contracted with. Hinata admitted that he didn't know because the mysterious person never answered whenever he called out. Minato then mentioned that Hinata had taken the promotion exam countless times over the past few years and asked why. Hinata simply replied that he had no talent, but Minato wasn't asking why he had failed. He wanted to know why Hinata kept trying. Hinata answered that he wanted to catch up to his little brother, no matter what it took. Minato was dumbfounded. Hinata was only an F-class, yet he seriously planned to catch up to Yuzuki, the rank 5 S-class hunter. He could barely hold back his laughter. Then Minato admitted that he liked Hinata because he was so interesting. Because of that, he handed him a note and instructed him to visit the location written on it the next day. The note directed Hinata to the second special classroom. The next day, Hinata nervously made his way toward the location. He gathered his courage and reached for the door, but before he could open it, the door suddenly exploded. 2 students were fighting inside. Hinata could only wonder what was wrong with these people. Minato arrived and found the classroom already reduced to rubble on the very first day. He stared at the students and asked what had happened. None of them answered, until the 2 students who had been fighting immediately blamed each other. Minato simply smiled and remarked that he was glad they were already getting along. Then he moved on with the day's agenda. He introduced himself as their instructor. Afterward, he ordered them to introduce themselves, starting with the blonde girl. She was Shishiku Rin, a D-rank hunter contracted with Beowulf, the hero of Norse mythology. The boy she had been fighting was Mikumari Fugao, another D-rank hunter. His partner was Minerva, the Roman goddess. The next student eagerly jumped at the chance to introduce herself. She was Ibu Masamune, a C-rank hunter contracted with her idol, Okita Tsuji. Masamune proudly praised her idol, earning strange looks from everyone around her. Fugu asked what was up with her outfit since she was wearing a shinsengumi kimono. Masamune looked delighted that he had asked. She revealed that she had always deeply admired the shinsengumi. Fugu raised an eyebrow, but Masamune continued, explaining that her absolute favorite was the 1st Division captain and genius swordsman, Okita Tsuji. Her current appearance was the result of that overwhelming admiration. Meanwhile, Hinata noticed a young boy hiding behind the storage room door. Since the boy was also a contract holder, Hinata wondered why he looked so terrified. Minato praised Masamune's passionate introduction. However, Fugo told her to hurry because the next person was still waiting. Hinata introduced himself as an F-rank rear support officer. He then admitted that he didn't know the identity of his contract partner. Naturally, everyone looked confused. Minato explained that Hinata had only formed his contract the previous day. Fugu pointed out that the selection battles had started 10 years ago. Masamune added that Hinata had certainly taken his sweet time. Minato then asked the class what Hinata and the other 3 students had in common. Rin answered that they were all young. While that was technically true, it wasn't the answer Minato wanted. He revealed that all 4 of them possessed unstable abilities. They also couldn't properly communicate with their contractors. And worst of all, they had a habit of losing control. Basically, every one of them struggled to grow because they couldn't properly control their own power. Minato then asked why they thought they had been gathered there. But before revealing the answer, they needed to review something important. The God King selection war had begun 10 years ago, so Minato asked them to explain its victory conditions. He called on Fugo to answer. Fugo explained that the God King candidates and heroes must resolve Ragnarok alongside their chosen humans. His answer was correct. Minato then asked how they could close the gates of the end, which continued spawning dangerous creatures. One of the girls answered that no solution had been discovered. And she was right. Everyone knew the victory condition, but no one knew how to achieve it. Next, Minato asked what the chosen humans would gain by risking their lives. He called on Rin, who answered that if their partner became the God King, they would receive 1 wish. Minato explained that no one was truly fighting for the world or humanity. Every chosen human was fighting to have their own wish granted, but there was a limit to what one person could accomplish alone. The Academy's policy was to eliminate creatures while searching for a solution. However, some selectors couldn't care less about other people's lives. Minato asked Hinata if he understood what that meant. Hinata answered that he was talking about the God Slayers. There were 2 major Ragna organizations. Every country had an academy and a God Slayer association, but the God King selection could only have 1 winner. That was why some Ragna selectors planned to eliminate their competition first. And if Minato was being honest, the academy was currently at a major disadvantage. Several high-ranking hunters had recently been killed. The information hadn't been released to the public, but even some S-rank hunters had suffered severe injuries. The students couldn't believe that an S-rank had lost. Fugu knew that news like this would cause a massive scandal, but Minato told them not to worry too much. After all, he claimed to be stronger than every S-rank combined. That was why he had gathered promising candidates whom everyone else had overlooked. The students immediately frowned at his ridiculous confidence. After explaining the situation, Minato told them that the academy needed to strengthen its forces immediately. That was why he had chosen individuals with hidden potential. From that day forward, they would undergo a special training program designed by him. The students were thrilled to receive direct training from the top-ranked S-class hunter. To them, it was an incredible honor. Hinata saw it as his chance to finally catch up to Yuzuki, but since Hinata still couldn't properly control his power, Minato told him that he first needed to learn how to work with the others. Then he casually advised Hinata not to die. Without warning, Minato grabbed him by the neck and electrocuted him. Hinata woke up in an unfamiliar place. He wondered where he was as he stared across the vast field covered in countless swords. He called out to the others, but no matter how far he walked, no one answered. Until he finally spotted someone. The stranger called him a brat and remarked that it had been a while. Hinata immediately recognized his voice. The stranger complained that Hinata seriously lacked manners. However, he was in a good mood, so he decided to overlook the disrespect. The mysterious samurai introduced himself as Kuroyasha. Hinata angrily demanded to know why Kuroyasha had stopped answering after forming a contract with him. Kuroyasha casually replied that he had simply lost interest, which only made Hinata more furious. Kuroyasha explained that he had lent Hinata his power because he respected his resolve to protect his brother. But after watching that pathetic fight, he was left completely disappointed. He had decided that Hinata wasn't worthy of his strength. Kuroyasha warned him that lending his power once had been more than enough, and there wouldn't be a second time. Hinata couldn't understand him. He assumed Kuroyasha also wanted to become the God King, but the samurai admitted that he had no interest in the throne. He simply planned to relax and enjoy sightseeing in the human world until the selection ended. But Hinata declared that he had once again decided to catch up to Yuzuki. He desperately begged Kuroyasha to lend him his strength. Kuroyasha silently studied him. Then he agreed and ordered Hinata to pick up a sword. If Hinata could leave even one meaningful wound on him, Kuroyasha would lend him his power. He told Hinata to prove that he was worthy. Hinata nearly froze beneath the samurai's overwhelming pressure. Even so, he grabbed a sword and charged straight at him. Then, he swung his blade. Kuroyasha ordered Hinata to stop lowering his head and face him properly. He asked if Hinata was afraid of cutting another person. Then he warned that anyone without the resolve to strike would be struck down first. Kuroyasha demonstrated his point by slicing Hinata's head off. Hinata could only stare in disbelief as his severed head flew through the air. Hinata stared in confusion as his severed head rolled across the ground. Kuroyasha picked up his head and asked how it felt to be nothing more than a severed head. Hinata admitted that it felt strange. Then, an overwhelming sleepiness consumed him. Suddenly, he jolted awake. He immediately grabbed his neck to make sure his head was still attached. Then, he turned aside and vomited. Kuroyasha silently watched him suffer. Hinata muttered that he had just died. Kuroyasha had killed him and sliced off his head. Kuroyasha simply remarked that Hinata looked absolutely pathetic. He explained that gods and heroes each lived inside worlds they had created themselves. This wasn't the mortal realm where humans lived. It was Kuroyasha's bloody battlefield, meaning Hinata's life and death were entirely under his control. Hinata finally understood that he wasn't in his own reality. Once Kuroyasha finished explaining, he ordered Hinata to return to his world. Hinata noticed the samurai walking away. Then, an exit appeared before him. Kuroyasha told him that it would return him to the mortal realm. He also warned Hinata that he would never be allowed to enter this place again. With that, Kuroyasha said goodbye. Hinata didn't respond. He simply clenched his fist. Then, he quietly walked toward the exit. Kuroyasha relaxed behind a large boulder. Suddenly, someone attacked him. He quickly blocked Hinata's surprise strike. Then Kuroyasha grabbed his wrist and slammed him into the ground. He demanded to know what the brat thought he was doing. Hinata apologized and admitted that he hadn't been prepared before. He had been terrified of both cutting someone and being cut himself. He confessed that he was still afraid, but he had decided never to run away again. Hinata had failed to protect his parents, but he still had Yuzuki. That was why he desperately wanted the strength to protect his remaining family. Kuroyasha released a heavy sigh. Then he ordered Hinata to stand and acknowledge that his resolve was genuine. Hinata's eyes lit up with hope, but the moment he stood, blood erupted from countless cuts across his body. Hinata collapsed again. Kuroyasha warned him not to misunderstand. He had only acknowledged Hinata's resolve. The conditions for earning his cooperation hadn't changed. If Hinata truly wanted to catch up to his brother and protect him, he needed to become stronger. However, Kuroyasha no longer ordered him to leave. He would let Hinata keep trying until he managed to land a single blow, even if it took hundreds or thousands of attempts. Hinata immediately tried again. Kuroyasha seemed amused by his fighting spirit and encouraged him to keep going. Then, he slashed Hinata apart again. On the next attempt, he pierced Hinata through the chest. After that, he repeatedly carved wounds across his entire body. Their brutal training continued. After countless attempts, Hinata's face had already turned pale. But he refused to stop. Kuroyasha prepared to kill him for the 372nd time. He couldn't believe that even after dying hundreds of times, Hinata still charged at him head-on. He drove his blade through Hinata's chest. But this time, something caught him off guard. Hinata grinned. Just as he had planned, Hinata launched an immediate counterattack. Unfortunately, his blade still missed. Even so, he was thrilled that he had come so close. Kuroyasha realized that Hinata had repeatedly used the same move to set up that attack. The brat had carefully thought everything through. Hinata confidently declared that his next strike would definitely land. Kuroyasha admitted that even a complete amateur would learn something after being cut down hundreds of times, so he decided to change his tactics. His sword suddenly transformed into a spear. Hinata's jaw dropped when he saw the weapon change. Kuroyasha activated hundredfold martial arts. He explained that he had lived in an era so simple that a warrior could survive through swordsmanship alone. Then, his spear pierced Hinata through the chest. Hinata screamed from the unbearable pain. On his next attempt, an arrow struck him directly in the head. He was stunned to discover that Kuroyasha could also wield a bow and arrows. Hinata immediately ran to create more distance between them. But the moment he turned his back, another attack tore through his stomach. It left a massive hole in his body. Kuroyasha explained that his fighting style had changed once he encountered ranged weapons. Then he ordered Hinata to get up quickly so they could continue. After countless more battles, Hinata could barely breathe. Kuroyasha noticed that his last attack had failed to kill him, so he decided to end Hinata's suffering in one blow and raised his spear. But Hinata used that exact moment to stab him. It was a sneak attack. Hinata had endured unimaginable pain and desperately clung to life, all for that single strike. And after seeing how far the brat was willing to go just to land one blow, Kuroyasha was genuinely impressed. However, he still caught the tip of Hinata's sword with his bare hand. The sun had already begun to rise, and their brutal training finally came to an end. Hinata asked if Kuroyasha considered his sneak attack unfair, but Kuroyasha replied that a hit was still a hit, and a samurai never went back on his word. Just as he had promised, Kuroyasha would now fight alongside Hinata until the very end. Then, he handed Hinata a sword. Hinata happily accepted it and sincerely thanked him. Kuroyasha opened a portal and announced that it was time for Hinata to return to the world of the living. Meanwhile, another portal opened somewhere else, revealing Minato and Masamune. The moment Minato looked around, he realized that trouble was about to begin. Back to our boy. He asked Kuroyasha if he should simply enter the portal. Kuroyasha answered yes, but Hinata couldn't stop trembling in fear. Watching this cowardly display, Kuroyasha lost his patience and kicked the hell out of Hinata, sending him straight through the portal. Kuroyasha then watched his contracted human fall into the void, screaming at the top of his lungs. After that, Hinata opened his eyes and found himself sitting at his desk inside the classroom. He looked around in confusion. Then, he realized that only a little over an hour had passed. Kuroyasha appeared beside him and emphasized that the battlefield from earlier wasn't part of the real world. He began explaining that time flowed differently there, but suddenly stopped mid-sentence. After noticing the huge smile on Hinata's face, he couldn't help but ask what was wrong with him. Hinata was simply relieved. For a moment, he had worried that everything had only been a dream. Once Minato saw that Hinata was awake, he welcomed him back. And judging by Kuroyasha's appearance, Minato could tell that everything had gone well. Kuroyasha responded with a cold glare. Minato asked if they had managed to bond without Hinata getting killed. Hinata casually replied that Kuroyasha had killed him hundreds of times. Minato hadn't expected that answer. After all, a person's mind could break after experiencing death only once. Kuroyasha silently watched their exchange. Hinata then asked where everyone else had gone. Minato pointed toward the window. Hinata looked outside and was shocked to see all the students lying across the field. He asked why everyone had been beaten up. Minato explained that Hinata was the only student he had fought directly. While waiting for him to wake up, Minato had given the others a small proficiency test. The students demanded to know which part of that nightmare counted as a test. They called Minato a demon, while Masamune admitted that she genuinely thought she was going to die. Now that Minato had a solid understanding of everyone's current abilities, he wanted them to begin training in pairs. The first pair consisted of Fugo and Rin. Neither of them looked happy with the arrangement. Minato then showed them a poster explaining their training exercise. Fugu laughed at the idea of playing tag with a female gorilla. Naturally, Rin didn't appreciate the insult. Minato told them that he would explain the specific rules once they reached the training grounds. He already knew that if he left Fugu and Rin alone, they would immediately start fighting again. The next pair consisted of Masamune and Hinata. They would fight seriously with their abilities allowed. Since both were swordsman types, the goal was to improve their combat skills against other hunters. Once Minato finished explaining, everyone headed outside. Hinata approached Masamune and formally addressed her by her full name. She complained that it sounded too distant and told him to simply call her Masamune. Hinata did as she asked, but Masamune continued addressing him as Master Hinata. He remembered that she couldn't communicate with her contractor. But when Hinata looked toward Okita, the hero appeared completely terrified. He wondered if that had something to do with their problem. Masamune revealed that Okita seemed frightened of her, though she had no idea why. She claimed that throughout the 10 years of their contract, she had done everything possible to become closer to him. She had even decorated her entire room with portraits of Okita, and she had visited every location connected to his life. Every morning and night, Masamune studied everything she could find about him. Whenever she spoke about Okita, it was as if the legendary swordsman from her books had come alive before her eyes. She constantly expressed how deeply she respected him. Masamune couldn't understand why Okita refused to return her love. Hinata awkwardly suggested that she might have taken her admiration a little too far. They soon reached the training hall. Hinata called upon Kuroyasha for assistance. His clothes immediately transformed into a samurai outfit. Masamune told him that he looked incredibly cool. Hinata explained that this was the first time Kuroyasha had willingly resonated with him. Masamune announced that they could begin. Hinata asked if she wasn't going to resonate with Okita. She explained that since she couldn't communicate with her contractor, she couldn't freely activate resonance. Okita listened from a distance while Masamune told Hinata not to worry. She lowered herself into a fighting stance. Then, she unsheathed her sword and attacked without warning, catching Hinata by surprise. Her sharp technique immediately caught Kuroyasha's attention. Masamune revealed that her family operated a swordsmanship dojo, where she worked as an assistant instructor. Kuroyasha warned Hinata to remain careful because Masamune wasn't merely all talk. Hinata realized that she possessed the strength of a C rank, even without resonance. He struggled to block her powerful sword strike. Masamune continued attacking, while Hinata desperately parried each blow. Kuroyasha told Hinata to listen carefully, but since Hinata was barely surviving Masamune's attacks, he questioned whether this was really the best time. Kuroyasha explained that he wanted to witness the girl's full potential. He ordered Hinata to force her into resonance, no matter what. Hinata complained that if it were that easy, he wouldn't be struggling in the first place. But Kuroyasha claimed that since her contractor was a warrior, there was one simple way to force him to cooperate. Hinata decided to give it a shot. Masamune attacked again. Hinata steadied himself and braced for the incoming strike. The moment her sword collided with his, Hinata's blade suddenly changed shape. Masamune froze in shock. His sword curved around her weapon and headed straight for her neck. The blade stopped only an inch away. Masamune knew she couldn't dodge it in time. In desperation, she recklessly swung her sword, but to her surprise, her blade suddenly began resonating. Then a voice declared that although he had no idea who Hinata was, he wouldn't let him lay a single finger on her. Okita Tsuji, the 1st Division captain of the Shinsengumi, finally revealed himself, leaving Masamune completely stunned. Okita told Masamune to ready her sword. He declared that he would lend her his strength and help punish those scoundrels. But then, he noticed something strange. Kuroyasha proudly boasted that everything had unfolded exactly as he predicted. Masamune noticed Hinata's guilty expression, so he explained what Kuroyasha had made him do. Earlier, Kuroyasha had suggested using a samurai's instincts against Okita. Hinata had no idea what he meant. Kuroyasha explained that samurai would willingly risk their lives to protect those precious to them. That instinct would be even stronger in someone who had risen to the level of a hero. Hinata asked what he needed to do. Kuroyasha told him to kill the young girl. Hinata immediately scolded him, but Kuroyasha warned him not to jump to conclusions. Hinata only needed to pretend that he intended to kill her. Kuroyasha knew that if Masamune were pushed to the brink of death, her contractor would finally reveal himself. Hinata followed his plan. After hearing the truth, Okita began trembling. Meanwhile, Masamune was touched that Okita cared so deeply about her. She had always believed that he disliked her. Masamune feared that they would never communicate or use their power together. Okita apologized for making her feel uneasy. Even so, he had always recognized her worth, which was why he had formed a contract with her. Then, he invited Masamune to fight alongside him. A bright smile spread across her face. She sincerely thanked Hinata for giving her the chance to finally speak with Okita. Kuroyasha replied that he had simply wanted to witness her full power. Since that was the case, Masamune decided to show them her strength as thanks. She unleashed the full extent of her power by activating resonance and drawing the skill Kiku Ichimonji Norimune. Masamune locked onto her target. Then, she charged toward Hinata at incredible speed using 3-stage thrust. Hinata immediately realized that he was in serious trouble. A deafening explosion tore through the training hall. Afterward, they walked through the hallway. Masamune looked completely satisfied, while Hinata dragged his battered body behind her. She proudly declared that it had been a fulfilling training session and wanted to do it again. Kuroyasha sighed before muttering that Hinata looked pathetic. Back inside the classroom, Hinata asked if the others were still playing tag. Meanwhile, Minato asked how their training had gone. The moment he saw Okita beside Masamune, he knew they had successfully formed a bond. Minato patted Masamune's head and explained that she was already powerful in her base state. He had figured that only a serious fight against another candidate could force the pair to connect. Masamune happily confirmed that his plan had worked. She then noticed a strange creature inside the room and asked what it was. The creature looked incredibly ferocious and possessed a long, lizard-like tail. Suddenly, Fugu was sent flying. He desperately reminded Rin that attacking him was against the rules. Minato explained that they were playing tag with unusual rules, where only the person running away was allowed to attack. Since both students possessed unstable abilities, he believed it would be perfect training for them. However, their contractors were far more eccentric than he had expected. Rin's contractor, Beowulf, the hero of Geatish mythology, ordered her to kill her opponent. Fugu desperately asked Minerva to help restrain their opponent, but nothing happened. When he turned around, he spotted a green owl that ordered him to remain quiet because its master was resting. Apparently, Minerva, the goddess of Roman mythology, had fallen asleep. Fugu couldn't believe it. He demanded to know why she was sleeping in the middle of a battle. But while he was distracted, Rin attacked. She activated her skill, Gritting Teeth. Once their match ended, Minato announced the final training exercise. It was the moment everyone had been waiting for, a 1 versus 4 battle between the students and Minato. Their match would begin after a 5-minute break. Unfortunately, Fugu was already in terrible shape. Meanwhile, one of the students asked what their plan was. They knew they had no chance of defeating Minato in a direct confrontation. Rin asked if Fugo was scared. He denied it, explaining that he simply refused to challenge the rank 1 S-class hunter without a plan. Masamune realized that Fugu was suggesting they form a strategy, though she doubted any plan would work against Minato. Fugu admitted that 4 people who had only just met possessed no real teamwork. At the very least, they needed to decide their positions. He and Rin were specialized fighters. Fugu attacked from long range, while Rin specialized in close combat. That meant Rin would handle the vanguard while Fugu covered the rear. He asked if Masamune and Hinata were comfortable fighting in the center, and they both nodded. Minato asked if their strategy meeting was finally over. He explained that their battle would begin the moment his cigarette touched the floor. Everyone immediately prepared themselves, and the instant the cigarette hit the ground, Fugu ordered Rin to attack. She immediately yelled at him not to give her orders. Then, Rin unleashed a devastating strike, but Minato effortlessly blocked it with his bare hand. Masamune readied her sword, and waited for the signal. Then, she attacked alongside Hinata. Fugu celebrated when their attacks appeared to strike Minato, but Minato suddenly appeared behind Masamune. He admitted that Rin had created an excellent smokescreen, but their timing and intentions became painfully obvious whenever they shouted before attacking. Hinata immediately spun toward the sound of his voice. He noticed that Minato had only activated resonance on one hand and one foot. Minato was caught off guard when Hinata suddenly closed the distance. At the same moment, thick vines wrapped around Minato's legs. Fugu had restrained him. Minato praised their coordination, especially for a strategy they had created on the spot. But when it came to raw strength, Minato refused to lose. He overpowered all of them with one single attack. Within 20 seconds, he wiped out the entire team. Minato stared at them and called their performance pathetic. They hadn't even survived for 5 minutes. Hinata became curious about Minato's contractor. Fugu explained that the identities of most S-class contractors were kept private. Masamune agreed that some hunters deliberately concealed them, while Rin wondered why anyone would do that. Suddenly, someone appeared beside Hinata and muttered that everything looked boring. Minato had been speaking, but immediately froze when he noticed the stranger beside Hinata. As Hinata turned toward him, the mysterious figure asked Minato if he truly had time to play with children. Minato yelled at the stranger to get away from the boy. The intruder was none other than Zeus. He clung to Hinata's back and asked Minato what he hoped to gain by training his own competitors. Zeus suggested simply killing them while they were still weak. The 4 students stared at him in horror. At that moment, everyone became certain of one thing. The current king of gods couldn't care less about humanity, not even a little. At sunset, the classroom had been completely reduced to rubble. Everyone was exhausted. They had been gathered without warning and immediately thrown into a mock battle against the rank 1 S-class hunter. Rin complained that the training had been far too extreme for their first day, and Zeus appearing at the end had somehow made everything even crazier. Fugu asked if they seriously believed they could survive in that class. Rin and Hinata both had their doubts, but Masamune loudly declared that every cloud had a silver lining. She told them there was no point worrying about a future they hadn't even experienced. Tomorrow's problems were for their future selves to handle. Hinata remarked that she was far too positive. However, Rin agreed that worrying now would only waste their time and suggested they head home. Just before they could leave, Minato happily announced that he had caught them in time. There was one final place he wanted to show them. The exhausted students begged him to let them rest. Fugu complained that they were running on empty, but Minato promised it would only take a moment, and he guaranteed that they would love it. That immediately caught their attention. Minato brought them to a luxurious hotel. He explained that it was one of the dormitories owned by the Institute and was reserved exclusively for high-ranking hunters. It contained an all-you-can-eat cafeteria serving Japanese, Western, and Chinese food. There was also a gym packed with the latest equipment, and even a communal bath open 24 hours a day. Masamune admitted that the place looked incredible, but she worried about how much the rent would cost. Minato revealed that everything was completely free. The Hunter Training Institution, commonly known as the HII, was a government agency created for the sole purpose of resolving the Ragnarok Gates. It managed every chosen one in Japan and trained those who volunteered to become hunters. Since hunters played a vital role in protecting the public from creatures, the Institute received a budget and benefits far beyond those of any existing police force. Fugu couldn't believe they called it a dormitory when it looked more like a 5-star hotel. Minato casually mentioned that the S-class dormitories were even more impressive. Suddenly, Rin excitedly called everyone over to see something. She had discovered one of the bedrooms. The room looked incredibly stylish. Hinata had only ever seen places like it on television, while Rin immediately jumped onto the bed. Minato explained that it was a private room for the hunters living there. Rin couldn't believe it. He confirmed that every hunter received a fully furnished room of their own. Then Minato told them to enjoy the view because starting tomorrow, this place would become their new home. Everyone's faces instantly turned pale. None of them had expected that. They couldn't believe that they would be allowed to live there too. Hinata wondered if it was truly okay since he was only an F rank. Minato assured him that it was fine and claimed that the facility's staff would be more than happy to assist them. He explained that despite the last-minute request, the staff had rushed to prepare 4 rooms. However, the students strongly suspected that Minato had threatened them. Rin was overjoyed and announced that she was heading home immediately to pack. Masamune exclaimed that everything felt like a dream. Masamune suggested holding a housewarming party in Rin's room, and Rin loved the idea. Meanwhile, Hinata noticed that Fugu had gone strangely quiet. A gloomy expression covered his face. Hinata watched him carefully until Minato told everyone to head home and pack their belongings. The next day, Rin finished packing her belongings. Then she left the Ayozora foster home. Meanwhile, Masamune packed an enormous collection of Okita figures. Soon, she was ready as well. Their boxes were loaded onto a moving truck. Just as Fugu was about to leave, his brother called out to him. Fugu turned around with a sad smile. Then he gently patted his brother's head. Meanwhile, Hinata was praying at his family home. His expression was completely serious. He informed his parents that he had finally been chosen. He also told them that his instructor was the rank 1 S-class hunter and that he had made some amazing friends. Hinata admitted that he was still nowhere near Yuzuki's level, but he was determined to become stronger, strong enough to truly protect his little brother. He promised them that he would. Suddenly, someone called out to him. It was his grandmother, who apologized for interrupting his prayer. Hinata assured her that it was fine. Then she invited him to join them for breakfast. He thanked her, but explained that he was running out of time. He asked if they could eat together on his next visit, but his grandmother told him not to refuse because this might be their final chance. Hinata realized that she was right. She had prepared plenty of his favorite simmered stew and encouraged him to eat as many servings as he wanted. Hinata sincerely thanked her. His grandfather then repeated what he had told Hinata on the day Yuzuki left. Hinata was his own person. He needed to remember that. He didn't have to live his life exactly like Yuzuki. Hinata was stunned. Hinata admitted that he still felt uneasy. He wasn't sure if he could truly pull it off, but his grandfather assured him that everything would be fine. Hinata possessed the strength to keep moving forward without giving up. He had been that way since childhood. Whenever he fell, he would cry, but he always stood back up and continued running. His grandmother agreed, recalling how Hinata never cared how muddy he became as long as he could try again. They had witnessed how hard he worked all these years, and they were certain that his parents would be incredibly proud of him. Their words brought a warm smile to Hinata's face. He thanked them and promised to give everything he had, following his own path and making his family proud. After finishing breakfast, Hinata left home. Nothing awaited him now, but a long path filled with adventures and trials. However, with his family's words carved into his heart, our protagonist stepped forward with renewed determination. Several weeks had passed since the special class began. Minato ordered the students to keep the attacks coming. He had prepared a deflection shooting exercise using combat robots. Each student needed to destroy 10 targets. Then, he told everyone to get ready. Masamune and Fugu immediately attacked. Meanwhile, Hinata and Rin faced each other in a mock battle. Hinata leaped high into the air, then he swung his sword. Rin criticized him for being too soft. Hinata shot back that she was one to talk. Rin planted her feet firmly against the ceiling. Then she used it to launch herself toward him. Their blades collided in mid-air. At exactly 12 noon, the bell rang. Their morning training session had finally ended. Rin was proud that she hadn't lost control even once that day. Meanwhile, Hinata admitted that he still couldn't match her raw strength. Fugu cursed Minerva for falling asleep again during the second half of training. In the background, Okita patiently taught Masamune to loosen her grip on her sword. Minato remarked that everyone still looked energetic, even though they used to run out of stamina quickly. Fugu replied that this was what happened when someone endured that insane training every day. They had trained for 3 straight hours since early morning, and all 4 students could now maintain resonance. Minato decided that they were finally ready for the next stage. It was time for their first mission. Everyone stared at him in shock. At a factory, a staff member called Hinata a lifesaver and praised him for arriving so quickly. It was exactly what he expected from the Hunter Training Institution. The worker explained that their factory equipment couldn't simply be shut down, but the police refused to understand. Hinata sighed because he hadn't expected to handle his first mission alone. Hinata asked where the creatures were. The worker pointed above and asked if he could see them. Several birds were flying overhead. At first, Hinata thought the mission looked simple, but upon closer inspection, he noticed that their heads were covered in flames. The worker had no idea when the creatures had settled there. Since they were only E-class and posed a low threat, the police kept delaying their response. He explained that the creatures occasionally swooped down and attacked employees. 5 workers had already been sent to the hospital. Worse, rumors claimed that ghosts appeared at night, causing employees to quit. Since the police still refused to act, everyone was grateful that someone from the institute had finally arrived. The worker grabbed Hinata's hand and bowed deeply, begging him to avenge his injured co-workers. Hinata understood their desperation. He boldly vowed to exterminate every last creature. Unfortunately, our protagonist had absolutely no idea how to strike an enemy that could fly. Kuroyasha was impressed that Hinata could speak so confidently without having a plan. Hinata stammered that he couldn't help it. He simply couldn't refuse someone who needed help. Hinata asked what they should do. Did Kuroyasha expect him to wait until the monstrous birds came down? But that would take far too long. Hinata suddenly leaped into the air. If the birds were flying too high for him to reach, then he would simply bring the fight to them. One of the creatures froze as Hinata suddenly appeared before it. Hinata launched himself high enough to reach the birds, but to his surprise, the creature moved incredibly fast. His blade barely missed it. Then, Hinata began falling toward the ground. Only now did he admit that he hadn't thought about the landing. He crashed directly into a car. Kuroyasha scolded him, warning that even recklessness had its limits, but Hinata insisted that he could succeed on the next attempt. Kuroyasha stared at him in disbelief and asked if he seriously planned to try again. Hinata replied, "Of course." After a while, he was still doing it. Hinata looked like he was playing a ridiculous game of tag with the birds in midair. The creatures also began attacking him. One strike sent him crashing into a large metal tank. Hinata cursed the bird, while Kuroyasha pointed out that the creatures had been completely toying with him. They would accomplish nothing at that rate, and the sun would set in less than an hour. But Hinata couldn't think of another way to bring the birds down. Then he remembered how Kuroyasha had transformed his weapon before using mastery of all martial arts. Hinata wondered if he could do the same. Kuroyasha explained that the technique required mastery over every kind of weapon, so it might still be too advanced for him. Still, there was no harm in trying. Kuroyasha agreed to teach him and encouraged him to give it a shot. First, Hinata needed to imagine his shadow as soft, shapeable metal. Kuroyasha instructed him to form a bow inside his mind, visualizing its color, texture, and shape in perfect detail. Hinata quickly realized that this would be much harder than expected. Suddenly, power violently erupted from his body, and his resonance immediately broke apart. Kuroyasha explained that since Hinata had never even touched a bow, he couldn't expect to succeed on his first attempt. Hinata wanted to try again, but Kuroyasha suddenly told him to wait. The number of birds had rapidly increased, and they were beginning to behave strangely. The creatures appeared to be merging. Hinata remembered the worker's warning about a ghost appearing at night, and this might have been it. When the giant bird flapped its wings, several metal pipes were sent flying. The incoming rubble headed straight toward Hinata. Kuroyasha shouted at him to activate resonance, warning that the debris would riddle his human body with holes. Hinata cried out in pain. He tightly gripped his sword. Then he attempted to resonate, but to his shock, nothing happened. The giant bird charged toward him. Kuroyasha ordered Hinata to retreat and find somewhere to hide. Hinata ran as fast as he could, all while wondering why he couldn't activate resonance. He hid behind a small building. Meanwhile, the giant bird continued wreaking havoc across the factory. Kuroyasha asked if Hinata could activate resonance now. Hinata tried again, but just as he feared, it still didn't work. He couldn't understand why he had suddenly lost the ability to resonate. Kuroyasha explained that Hinata had reached the limit of his vessel. Then, he told Hinata to remember what Minato had taught them several days earlier. Back then, inside the classroom. Minato had given the students a lesson about resonance. Fugo pointed out that they could already resonate normally. Rin agreed, so the lesson felt a little late. Minato asked Fugo to explain what resonance actually was. Fugo hesitated before answering that it allowed them to borrow their contractor's power and become stronger. His answer wasn't wrong, but it was far too broad. Minato explained that resonance was a technique that allowed humans to channel their contractor's power and wield it as their own. Because their contractors remained so close to them, the candidates often forgot that the power of gods and heroes was naturally too immense for humans to handle. If someone used that power carelessly, they could go berserk or completely lose the ability to use it. Every candidate possessed something similar to a vessel that received their contractor's power. The more they used resonance, the stronger that vessel became. A larger vessel allowed someone to maintain resonance longer and unleash more powerful techniques. Increasing that capacity was the main purpose of their current basic training. Minato asked if everyone understood. Ultimately, whether they mastered their contractor's power or completely wasted it depended on them. Back in the present, Kuroyasha asked if Hinata remembered the lesson. Hinata answered that he did. The battle had dragged on for so long that it wasn't strange for his power to bottom out. In his current condition, Kuroyasha estimated that Hinata could only maintain resonance for a few seconds. He advised Hinata to give up and leave the mission to someone else, but Hinata hesitantly replied, "But..." Kuroyasha asked what was bothering him. Suddenly, several objects flew toward them. Hinata looked up in shock. They were feathers sharpened like blades. The giant bird had found them. Its feathers began glowing brightly. Then, it fired them directly at Hinata. Kuroyasha shouted at him to run. He directed Hinata toward the building ahead, but one of the feathers struck him. The blade-like feather became lodged deep inside his leg. Kuroyasha yelled at Hinata to keep moving, warning that stopping would turn him into a sitting duck. The giant bird rapidly approached. Hinata desperately crawled into a narrow alleyway. The creature couldn't fit through the opening, causing it to screech furiously. Hinata was safe for the moment. He painfully pulled the feather from his leg. Kuroyasha stated that they had reached their limit. With Hinata's injured leg, there was no way he could continue running. Fortunately, the bird appeared to have lost sight of them. Kuroyasha suggested calling for backup while they still had the chance, but he stopped when he saw Hinata. Kuroyasha demanded to know what he was doing. Hinata answered that he was trying to generate a bow. He felt like he was finally beginning to understand the technique. Kuroyasha shouted at him to stop, calling it a complete waste of time. With both Hinata's physical and mental strength near their limits, there was no possibility of successfully generating a bow. But Hinata focused on Kuroyasha's earlier teachings. The hardest part was creating a clear image of the bow's shape. He repeatedly told himself to remember. Hinata desperately tried to recall the exact bow Kuroyasha had used during their training. Kuroyasha admitted that they hadn't expected the enemy to evolve so drastically. Even if they retreated now, there would be no shame in it. Suddenly, the giant bird found them again. Kuroyasha turned toward the creature. Then he ordered Hinata to run. He began scolding Hinata for refusing to stop, but his words suddenly faded, because Hinata was actually succeeding. The giant bird rapidly closed in. And finally, Hinata formed the great bow. He immediately released an arrow. The projectile blasted straight through the giant bird's head. Hinata stared in disbelief. The enormous creature crashed to the ground. Then Hinata erupted with joy after realizing that he had actually succeeded. Even Kuroyasha found the achievement unbelievable. He had never expected Hinata to complete the bow using imagination alone without any real training. Kuroyasha wondered whether it came from natural talent or extraordinary concentration. Hinata noticed Kuroyasha staring at him. Kuroyasha looked genuinely pleased. Perhaps this young man could evolve and master all martial arts, eventually reaching a realm that even Kuroyasha himself had never reached. When Kuroyasha remained silent, Hinata called his name. The samurai simply replied that it was nothing. Then Kuroyasha gently patted Hinata's head and praised him for doing well. He called the attack magnificent, causing Hinata to grin from ear to ear. After that, we see Hinata demonstrating the great bow. Minato watched with an amused smile. Hinata eagerly asked what he thought. Minato replied that it wasn't bad. With that level of precision, the technique was already reliable enough for actual combat. He remarked in amazement that Hinata seemed to have matured after completing his first mission, and the same was true for all 4 students. Rin struggled to lift something enormous, but eventually, she successfully raised a massive boulder. Fugu could now properly cast a spell. Meanwhile, Masamune sliced through several combat robots with a single attack. Hinata exclaimed that everyone had become amazing. Watching them, Minato began thinking about their next rank evaluation, which was only 6 months away. If they continued improving at this pace, the results would be very interesting. Then, Minato remembered that their midterm exams were approaching. Everyone's faces instantly turned pale. When Minato asked what was wrong, Fugo explained that they had been treated like problem children from the beginning. Not one of them had a good history with written tests. He hoped that Hinata might be different. But the mere thought of taking an exam caused Hinata to faint. Hinata and the others were so terrified because the Hunter Department held a unique position among the Institute's many divisions. The Hunter Training Institution contained the Hunter Information, Legal, Development, Education, Finance, and Medical departments. Through the annual rank evaluation, students aiming to become professional hunters were separated into 7 ranks, ranging from F to S. Their exact placements within those ranks were determined by their midterm and final exam results. Even students in the same rank were ranked against one another. Those at the top climbed higher, while those at the bottom dropped even further within the Institute's highly divided class system. In short, the Hunter Department is a complete meritocracy. Minato apologized and admitted that he wasn't familiar with those kinds of struggles. After all, he was a genius who had never placed anywhere below first until graduation. He announced that the upcoming exam would mark the special class's official debut, and he was eagerly looking forward to their performance. Minato was certain that they would completely crush every other class. At the cafeteria, someone suggested holding a group study session. Fugu agreed that they were in serious trouble. He assumed that each student had at least one subject they were good at. Teaching one another would be more efficient than studying alone. In short, they needed to prepare for the test together. Masamune had no objections, though she found it strange to see Fugu acting so motivated. Hinata explained that Minato had said he was looking forward to their results. Hearing that had made him want to work hard as well. Rin didn't object either, but she questioned whether studying together would actually improve their grades. Hinata replied that they wouldn't know unless they tried, and it was still better than worrying alone. Masamune saw it as the perfect opportunity and suggested that all 4 of them combine their strengths. Rin agreed to give it a shot since doing nothing certainly wouldn't help them. That night, the 4 students gathered inside one of their rooms. Everyone was shocked to learn that Fugu had ranked 8th in the entire grade on the written exam. Rin refused to believe it, especially with a face like his. Fugu yelled that his appearance had nothing to do with his intelligence. Masamune stared at his nearly perfect subject scores in amazement. Hinata realized that with grades like those, Fugu should have been at the top of D class. Fugu explained that he would have been if their rankings depended only on the written test. Each periodic test consisted of 3 different exams, with the final ranking determined by their combined scores. The written exam measured general education along with knowledge about creature ecology, gods, and heroes. The practical exam evaluated basic physical strength and the usefulness of each student's abilities. Finally, the general exercise tested practical judgment through mock battles and field training. However, the contents of the general exercise remained secret until the day of the test. Fugu revealed that he always got destroyed in the practical exam and general exercise because Minerva remained awake for such a short time. Rin asked which mythologies would appear on the upcoming test. Hinata answered that it would cover Roman and Norse mythology. Masamune admitted that she was somehow terrible at everything except Japanese mythology. Fugu explained that they struggled because they tried to memorize everything through repetition instead of learning each mythology as a story. Afterward, Rin guided everyone through physical training at the gym. They followed it with mock battles as the days quickly passed. Hinata continued practicing even beneath the pouring rain. 2 weeks later, the day of the midterm exam finally arrived. Fugu declared that they had done everything possible, while Rin added that their secret strategy was also beginning to take shape. Masamune excitedly announced that it was finally time. Suddenly, the surrounding students gathered because a famous hunter had appeared. It was Yuzuki Kamio, the rank 5 S-class hunter. Masamune was amazed to finally see the rumored youngest S-class hunter in history. Rin, however, immediately scoffed and declared that she didn't like him. Yuzuki noticed Hinata. The moment their eyes met, a chill ran down Hinata's spine. Yuzuki walked directly toward their group. Then, he coldly greeted his older brother and remarked that it had been a while. Fugu, Masamune, and Rin were stunned to discover that the two were brothers. Yuzuki had heard that Hinata had transferred into the special class founded by Minato. He dismissed it as nothing more than a collection of inferior students. Everyone immediately took offense. Fugu and Rin prepared to charge at him, but Masamune held them back. Fugu warned the four-eyed bastard not to act superior just because he was S-class. Yuzuki remarked that they were incredibly violent. Still, he admitted that classmates like them suited his brother perfectly. Hinata grabbed Yuzuki by the collar and warned that he could say anything he wanted about him, but he would never forgive anyone who insulted his friends. Yuzuki slapped Hinata's hand away. Then, he told the inferior students to enjoy their little game of playing house. Because no matter how hard his brother struggled, Hinata would never catch up to him. All four students instantly became serious. The students gathered inside the auditorium according to their ranks. Masamune finally realized that Hinata and Yuzuki were twins. After looking more closely, Rin agreed that they genuinely resembled each other. Fugu asked why Hinata had kept it secret until now. The question immediately made Hinata uncomfortable. Even so, Hinata gathered his courage and told them about Yuzuki, the mistreatment he had endured, and their painful childhood. Fugu, Masamune, and Rin listened carefully to every word. After hearing his story, Fugu apologized for asking. Hinata assured him that it was fine. Rin declared that the timing was perfect. She stepped forward and asked if Hinata had forgotten what they had been working so hard to achieve. Their goal wasn't merely to defeat the other classes. She told Hinata to knock his arrogant little brother down a peg. Her bold suggestion caught Hinata completely off guard. He looked across the auditorium at Yuzuki, stunned by the thought of actually defeating him. Suddenly, loud microphone feedback echoed through the hall and startled the students. Someone quietly informed the director that his microphone was already on, causing him to awkwardly apologize. Ranzo Todo, the head of the Hunter Training Institute, formally addressed the students and apologized for keeping them waiting. He pointed toward a screen displaying the traditional 3-day test schedule, a written exam, a practical exam, and a comprehensive exercise. The institute had followed this exact schedule for several years. The reason was simple. Students repeatedly lost their lives during the final comprehensive exercise. Todo explained that the institute usually removed anyone who failed to meet a certain standard during the first 2 days. By filtering out weaker students beforehand, they hoped to prevent unnecessary deaths during the final exercise. However, he revealed that they wouldn't be following the usual schedule. This year, the exam would begin with a comprehensive exercise. The students immediately became anxious when they realized that their first day wouldn't begin with the written exam. Todo laughed and warned them never to assume that everything would proceed according to plan. After all, a hunter's true worth was revealed when facing the unexpected. He glanced toward a hooded figure hidden nearby, who was holding a strange device. The figure responded with a silent hand signal. Then, without warning, a massive traditional structure materialized inside the auditorium. The students watched in complete shock. Their jaws dropped while Todo remained perfectly calm. The towering gate slowly creaked open, revealing a swirling purple portal that left the students bewildered. Everyone stared directly at it. Todo announced that the comprehensive exercise would be a class-based group battle. Each class would enter a virtual world prepared by the Institute and exterminate the creatures waiting inside. He challenged the future hunter candidates to show the results of all their hard work. Hinata's expression immediately turned serious. An announcement ordered everyone to line up while each class representative stepped forward. Among them was Jinichi Sone, the rank 1 representative of F class. His classmates erupted in cheers as they entered the portal. A pink-haired man watched them leave. He was Yagami Hawk, the rank 1 representative of A class. He suggested that his group head inside next, and his teammates cheered in agreement. The next group was led by Kongojiban, the rank 1 representative of B class. They were followed by Sayotome Natsuki, the rank 1 representative of C class, who trembled uncontrollably. Unlike Natsuki, Ashiya Makoto, the rank 1 representative of D class, smiled confidently as sparkling energy surrounded her. After them came Aizen Utahiko, the rank 1 representative of E class. Hinata ordered his teammates to move out, and everyone cheered. Before entering, Hinata glared toward Yuzuki. His younger brother simply stared ahead with a blank expression. Todo called out to Yuzuki, reminding him that despite being an S-class hunter, he was still a student and needed to enter the exam. Suddenly, glowing blue particles filled the air. Todo observed that the event had finally begun as holographic images of players, battles, and landscapes appeared within the particles. On top of a fortress wall, the F-class students battled flying beasts and a gigantic dragon. Inside a hellish world filled with fire and brimstone, an army of demons surged forward while the A-class students fought them with ease and excitement. Within a flooded, aquarium-like facility, giant sea monsters swam around as the B-class students discussed their strategy. The C-class representative cried in terror while her classmates desperately maintained a barrier against a giant dinosaur and several prehistoric predators. Far out in space, the D-class representative fought aggressive aliens among floating debris and enormous spaceships. Elsewhere, a giant ogre smashed the E-class representative directly in the face while an army of goblins cheered. As Todo observed the battles, he wondered if the exam's difficulty had been set a little too high. He questioned examiner Fuzaki, but she assured him that every scenario had been properly adjusted according to rank. Todo reluctantly accepted her explanation. Suddenly, Yuzuki approached him with a question. Todo was surprised to find that he still hadn't entered the portal. Yuzuki mentioned hearing rumors that upper management was considering demoting him after his defeat against the Undine. Todo demanded to know who had told him. Ignoring the question, Yuzuki calmly stated that rumors could never be stopped from spreading. With that, he presented the director with a proposal. If Yuzuki defeated one of the higher-ranked hunters present, he wanted Todo to overlook his possible demotion. Fuzaki immediately slammed her hand down in anger. She realized that Yuzuki was referring to her, the rank 4 S-class hunter and director of the Intelligence Bureau, contracted with the spirit Abe no Sime. Furious, she demanded to know if he genuinely believed he could defeat her. Yuzuki mocked Fuzaki by asking if she was getting old. Growing even angrier, she called him an arrogant brat. Fuzaki accepted his challenge and declared that if Yuzuki won, she would surrender her 4th-place ranking. Todo immediately tried to intervene, demanding to know why she was making such a reckless decision on her own. Before entering the portal, Yuzuki reminded her not to forget what she had just promised. Then, the portal closed behind him. Todo sighed at how ridiculously hot-blooded every S-class hunter seemed to be. Beside him, Fuzaki continued fuming alongside her contracted spirit, Abe no Seimi. Yuzuki opened his eyes. He found himself standing inside a narrow alley illuminated by traditional lanterns. Several women behind a nearby storefront called out to him and praised his handsome appearance. They giggled seductively and invited him inside to play with them. Yuzuki completely ignored them and continued walking. One of the women remarked on how cold he was. Suddenly, unnaturally long hands with razor-sharp nails wrapped around Yuzuki's neck from behind. He unleashed his power, instantly burning the hands to ashes. Yuzuki smirked and asked if Fuzaki was underestimating him, or if this was truly the full extent of her strength. Surrounded by dark energy, Fuzaki grinned wildly and told him to relax because their battle had only just begun. Then, she released even more power. Mystical talismans materialized around her as she launched her attack. Countless monstrous yokai appeared above the streets and surrounded Yuzuki from every direction, causing him to smile with excitement. Surrounded by surging dark energy, Fuzaki summoned a massive horde of monsters and ordered them to attack. The creatures immediately rushed toward Yuzuki. Yuzuki calmly gathered flames inside his hand. Then, he unleashed a devastating blast that instantly incinerated the first wave. Several animal-headed monsters broke through the flames and charged toward him. They attacked from both sides. The monsters struck with tremendous force, causing a massive explosion where Yuzuki stood. Their attacks shattered the ground beneath them, but Yuzuki was nowhere to be found. Confused, the monsters searched through the darkness. Yuzuki hovered safely above them and asked if they were struggling to see. He grinned and offered to light up the area for them. Then he created an enormous fireball and prepared to unleash it. His technique, penal hell, primordial radiance, engulfed the entire battlefield in flames. Yuzuki stood calmly within the raging inferno as fire rained around him. The sun god Ra complained that their enemies were incredibly boring, since none could put up a decent fight. He even questioned whether Fuzaki truly deserved her S-class rank. Yuzuki warned him not to be stupid. Fuzaki was rank 4 and could wipe them out instantly in a direct confrontation. Yuzuki laughed, pointing out that this would only matter if they intended to fight fairly. Meanwhile, Fuzaki panted heavily as the talismans around her burned away. Toru released a tired sigh. He realized that he had allowed them to make a ridiculous bet. Although Fuzaki had accepted Yuzuki's challenge, she hadn't neglected her responsibilities as an examiner. By observing through the eyes of her Shikigami, she continued commanding all 8 battlefields simultaneously. The leaders of each class were already considered exceptional. The 10th Hunter class was known as the undisputed Golden Generation, and calling them the greatest generation in history, both in quality and quantity, wouldn't be an exaggeration. Toru asked if Fuzaki actually had a plan to win. Did she seriously believe she could defeat the S-Class Yuzuki Kamio while simultaneously facing the entire Golden Generation? Fuzaki told him to remain quiet and watch. She confidently declared that she would crush Yuzuki in a heartbeat. Toru replied that as long as she understood the situation, everything was fine. After all, a chief could never allow herself to be defeated by an inferior. Internally, Fuzaki cursed Todo for being a cunning fox. She had no actual plan to win. She simply couldn't afford to lose, especially against Yuzuki. 1 year earlier, breaking news announced the birth of the youngest S-Class hunter in history. Minato showed the report to Fuzaki and remarked that reaching S-Class at only 16 was incredible. Irritated, Fuzaki told him to stop calling her Hitomi. Minato deliberately called her Hitomi again, while she ordered him to address her as Chief Fuzaki. Then he suggested that she become Yuzuki's mentor. Fuzaki stared at him in disbelief. She demanded to know what he was talking about. Minato explained that the director had originally asked him to handle Yuzuki, but he believed Fuzaki was much better suited for the job. He pointed out that she and the kid were surprisingly similar, prompting Fuzaki to ask how. Minato stopped to think for a moment. Then he cheerfully answered that they were both two-faced, instantly infuriating her. Putting the jokes aside, Minato showed Fuzaki a video of Yuzuki Kamio on his phone and asked her to look carefully. He pointed out that although Yuzuki was smiling, his eyes showed no happiness. Behind that fake smile was nothing but pure hatred. Minato warned that someone like Yuzuki would eventually explode if nobody kept him under control. Fuzaki asked why she needed to get involved. Minato replied that she was the kindest among all the S-Class hunters. That made her the only person capable of keeping Yuzuki in check. Before leaving, Minato asked her to do it for old time's sake and declared that he was counting on her. Fuzaki immediately protested. She insisted that she had never agreed to anything. After Minato left, Fuzaki released a frustrated sigh. She grumbled about how much of a pain the entire situation had become. Back to the present time, Fuzaki noted that an entire year had passed since she first met Yuzuki. She thought about how she had tried to reach him in her own way. However, she realized that in the end, he hadn't changed at all. Yuzuki replied that she was wrong. Several massive skeletal monsters appeared before him. Gathering flames around his body, Yuzuki admitted that thanks to Fuzaki, he had managed to come this far. He unleashed a devastating strike and declared that he was finally strong enough to reach her. Yuzuki thrust forward with his divine spear of blazing fire. The skeletal monsters were instantly reduced to ashes. Fuzaki realized that she couldn't overwhelm him through numbers alone. She bit her finger and decided that she had no other choice. Fuzaki doubted whether she could control the power in her exhausted state. However, she felt responsible for failing to keep Yuzuki on a leash. Blood dripped from her wounded finger. She chanted an incantation, calling upon the terrifying form of an ancient spirit lord and offering her blood to forge a new pact. From the pool of blood, a gigantic foot began taking shape. Fuzaki exclaimed that it was finally coming. Yuzuki watched in shock. Fuzaki had summoned the strongest Shikigami under her command. By the authority of her mandate, she ordered the creature to emerge and crush Yuzuki. The massive and terrifying Demon King Shutendoji finally manifested. Yuzuki immediately grew irritated. He couldn't understand how Fuzaki still had so much strength remaining. Shutendoji grabbed Yuzuki by the head and slammed him into the ground. Yuzuki coughed up blood. Shutendoji raised its foot and attempted to crush him. Yuzuki gritted his teeth. With a furious battle cry, flames violently erupted from his body. He held his ground as several blazing spheres formed around him. Then Yuzuki activated the halo of the sun god. Surrounded by raging flames, he desperately defended himself. Yuzuki unleashed an explosive wave of fire, trying to force the Demon King backward. But Shutendoji remained unfazed and swung its enormous blazing fist. Yuzuki cursed the monster's overwhelming strength. Suddenly, a wave of blue energy stopped Shutendoji's fist in midair. Even Fuzaki froze. She collapsed onto her knees. Toru wondered if she had completely exhausted her power. He reminded her that she had acted recklessly, but Fuzaki still refused to surrender. By that point, even her transformed state had disappeared. Suddenly, cracks spread across the ancient gate structure. Fuzaki panicked and shouted that they were under enemy attack. Elsewhere, Fugu and Masamune lay unconscious while someone strangled Hinata. 1 hour earlier, a massive dark castle stood beneath a burning blue sky. Hinata stood outside Training Center B alongside Masamune, Fugu, and Rin, observing the location of their selection exam. Fugu admitted that the castle gave him the creeps. Rin eagerly pointed out that their goal was simple: eliminate every enemy inside to pass. Masamune wondered how they should make their entrance. Under the moonlight, the fortress's massive stone drawbridge slowly lowered and revealed a path into the darkness. Fugu, Masamune, Hinata, and Rin prepared for battle. Fugu told everyone to look at the welcoming committee waiting for them. A group of armored knights surrounded by eerie blue flames stepped forward and blocked their path. The two sides immediately clashed. Rin screamed fiercely as she charged. With a single powerful strike, she smashed through several armored enemies. Masamune calmly closed her eyes as fragments of shattered armor rained around her. Then, she unleashed a flurry of rapid slashes that tore through every knight in her path. Fugu laughed at how fragile the enemies were. Hinata estimated that they were only around E-class level. Hinata carefully observed the battlefield. He remembered that if they had encountered a horde like this in the past, they would have immediately turned around and fled. But now, they had become much stronger. Hinata led the vanguard, cutting through the monster knights as he ordered his team to storm the top floor in a single push. Everyone shouted in agreement and continued their assault. They tore through monster knights, bats, and every other enemy blocking their path. Without slowing down, the team raced through the castle corridors. Eventually, they arrived inside a massive hall. As Hinata placed his hand against the enormous wooden doors, suffocating pressure poured from the other side. He slowly pushed the door open. The team stepped through, only to find the hall completely empty. Rin looked around in confusion and wondered if they had mistaken it for the boss room. Suddenly, Fugu told everyone to wait. At the far end of the hall, a massive coffin began rattling. Ominous dark energy erupted from within it. Then, 2 enormous bloodshot eyes opened. Without warning, Rin charged directly toward the coffin, causing Fugu to shout after her in panic. Rin leaped forward and declared that she wouldn't stand around waiting for her opponent to reveal itself. She slammed into the coffin with tremendous force, insisting that she wasn't some helpless weakling. Debris exploded from the impact as Rin mocked her opponent for being pathetic. Suddenly, the monster appeared directly behind her. Their clash filled the surrounding area with smoke, but Hinata stepped between them and blocked the attack. Rin stared at him in shock. Then, Hinata swung his weapon. Rin slid back to safety and thanked Hinata. Fugu and Masamune rushed over, while Hinata sighed in relief after reaching her in time. Furious, Fugu scolded Rin for rushing ahead and ignoring their secret strategy. Rin immediately realized her mistake. The monster possessed rows of sharp teeth and an unnaturally long tongue. The system identified it as a vampire and the dungeon boss, but its rank remained unknown. Several eyes of different sizes covered its forehead. Then, waves of dark energy and countless bats filled the room. Fugu froze after sensing its overwhelming killing intent. Even Masamune struggled to withstand the pressure. Her entire body trembled beneath the enemy's terrifying aura. Hinata reassured Masamune that everything would be fine. After all, they had trained tirelessly for this exact moment. Gripping his sword, Hinata declared that they could definitely win as long as they fought together. Fugu and Rin immediately agreed. Masamune stared at Hinata in awe. The group stood together, ready to reveal the full results of their training. Fugu ordered Rin to enter formation. As she rushed forward, Rin confidently yelled that he didn't need to tell her. The vampire unleashed a devastating crimson attack. The sudden blast appeared to catch the entire team off guard. Rin took the attack directly and was sent flying. But the monster suddenly became alarmed. Rin raised her head with a grin and asked what was wrong. She grabbed the vampire and pinned its arms against its sides, daring it to break free. That was the signal. Hinata and Masamune charged together. Hinata closed the distance and swung his sword. His blade struck cleanly, slicing through the enemy and spraying blood across the hall. Hinata immediately called out to Fugu. Resonating with Minerva's power, Fugu asked if they could pull it off. A massive magic circle formed above him. Minerva opened her eyes with intense focus when Fugu called her name. Power gathered at the tip of his lance. Fugu concentrated every ounce of energy. Then he unleashed Sophia Asteria, Meteor of Wisdom, causing a devastating spell to descend from above. The vampire stared up in horror. The attack blasted an enormous hole through its body. Moments later, the boss disintegrated into digital particles. Hinata excitedly declared that they had won. The team celebrated their flawless teamwork, confident that they had passed the exam. Suddenly, Hinata noticed something strange. He cautiously asked what it was. A mysterious figure slowly applauded from near the machinery. The stranger stepped out of a portal while continuing to clap. Several more people emerged behind him. He congratulated the students on passing their selection exam and praised their magnificent battle. Hinata politely thanked him. Internally, however, he had no idea who the man was and wondered if he belonged to the faculty. Fugu and Masamune looked equally confused. The stranger apologized for disturbing them while they were exhausted. Then, his expression darkened as he announced that it was their turn next. A large group of hostile figures appeared behind him before he menacingly invited the students to play with the God-Slaying Society. Inside the cathedral, the stranger asked if the students wanted to play with the God-Slaying Society. Masamune, Rin, and Fugu froze in shock and confusion upon hearing that name. The man quickly raised his hands and assured them that this wasn't a raid or hostile attack. He revealed a list containing the names Hinata Kamio, Ibu Masamune, Shishiku Rin, and Mikumari Fugo. He explained that his boss wanted to recruit promising young selectees. Then he asked what they thought. The stranger extended his hand and invited them to join the God-Slaying Society. Fugu immediately became furious. He yelled at the man not to mess with them. As far as he knew, joining the society meant being recruited to kill people. Masamune added that although they were still trainees, they were hunters who used their powers to save lives. The stranger admitted that they were killers, but claimed that their actions were necessary to end the God King selection. Hinata questioned his reasoning and pointed out that the man was only doing this to have his own wish granted. The accusation left the recruiter speechless. Then, he denied it. Dark energy erupted around him as he swore that he wasn't acting out of self-interest. Hinata immediately noticed the sudden change in the man's behavior. The recruiter explained that the God-Slaying Society followed one strict rule. Then, he removed his shirt, revealing a large Latin tattoo covering his back. It read, Badum nostrum unum tantum est. That single goal was the only thing their organization desired. The recruiter explained that it didn't matter which member became victorious. Whether their boss won or he did, they would use their wish for the exact same purpose. Hinata became curious about that wish, but Fugu grabbed him and warned him not to listen. A sinister smile spread across the recruiter's face. He revealed that their wish was to return the world to how it had been 10 years ago, to a time when the Gate of Ragnarok had never existed. Hinata, Masamune, Fugu, and Rin stared at him in shock. The recruiter happily declared that they could erase every tragedy from the last 10 years. Then he asked if that wasn't a wonderful wish. Rin dismissed his claim as a bluff, arguing that such a convenient wish couldn't possibly exist. However, the man confidently insisted that it would come true and that the society possessed evidence supporting it. Then, he asked if they truly didn't desire the same thing. He reminded them of every loved one they had lost because of the Gate of Demise. His words struck Hinata deeply as memories of his painful past returned. Masamune yelled at the recruiter to stop talking. She firmly ordered him to leave if he hadn't come there to launch a raid. A massive bald man wearing sunglasses stepped forward. The recruiter calmly warned Masamune that she shouldn't speak to them that way. The massive bald man towered over Masamune and blocked her path. Masamune demanded to know what he wanted. She added that they had nothing left to discuss. Without warning, the man delivered a brutal punch directly to her face. The bloody blow sent Masamune crashing into a wall. The man coldly replied that he felt the same way. Masamune collapsed with severe injuries. Hinata screamed her name. He and Rin glared at the attackers in fury, while Fugu complained that things always ended this way. The recruiter angrily accused the bald man of ruining his attempt at peaceful persuasion. But the brute dismissed his complaints, claiming that he had only been spouting nonsense. He ordered their men to beat the students half to death. The recruiter admitted that he liked that idea. They would simply capture the entire group by force. The students immediately ran for their lives. Fugu fell behind and took the first punch. Another powerful strike knocked Rin to the ground. Terrified, Hinata continued running, but someone suddenly grabbed him. The massive bald man had proven his point. They should have used force from the beginning. He choked Hinata while the other 3 students lay helplessly on the ground. The bald man ordered his subordinates to stop standing around and restrain them. Hinata screamed at the attackers to keep their hands off his friends. The brute violently pinned Hinata against a wall and ordered him to shut up. He declared that he absolutely hated people like Hinata. Suddenly, Rin forced herself back up and cursed the man. She attempted to kick him, but he effortlessly caught her leg and mocked her useless attack. The brute complained about Rin's constant yapping while she screamed in pain. Then, he ruthlessly hurled Rin across the battlefield and told her to die. She crashed through a stone wall, shattering the masonry upon impact. The force launched her through the opening and over the edge. Trembling, Hinata desperately reached toward her. His entire body shook as he watched Rin disappear from sight. The recruiter panicked and reminded the brute that these students were valuable recruits. After looking through the shattered wall, he demanded to know why anyone would throw her from such a great height. He became incredibly anxious, terrified of what would happen if one of the students died. Fortunately, someone rushed in and caught Rin. Suddenly, a scream echoed throughout the cathedral. Everyone turned toward the sound. Trembling in terror, the recruiter desperately called for help. Then, flames suddenly engulfed his entire body. He screamed as the fire consumed him. A voice asked if they were afraid. Surrounded by a towering wall of fire, Yuzuki complained that his battle with Fuzaki had been nothing but trouble. Battered and bleeding on the stone floor, Hinata stared at his younger brother in shock. The members of the God-slaying society cursed as they tried to understand what was happening. As Yuzuki's flames intensified, they questioned why the rank 5 S-class hunter was there. He carried an unconscious Rin in his arms. Hinata looked up at his brother in confusion. Yuzuki casually moved one finger. His flames instantly burned away the restraints binding Hinata and his friends. Yuzuki addressed his brother with a simple, "Hey." Then, he tossed Rin toward him. Hinata caught her. Yuzuki explained that an exit was located near the castle gate and advised him to evacuate unless he wanted to get caught in the battle. But Hinata refused to run away. He declared that they could still fight. Determined, Hinata suggested fighting together and insisted that they could win through teamwork. However, Yuzuki told him to take his little friendship act somewhere else. He asked if he seriously needed to spell it out for Hinata. Then, Yuzuki coldly ordered him to leave because he was nothing but dead weight. Hinata froze as his younger brother labeled him defective trash. Suddenly, the massive bald man called out to Yuzuki and demanded an answer. He wanted to know what had happened to the dozens of skilled fighters they had sent after him. With a smug smile, Yuzuki replied that nobody knew. He dismissed them as small fries. Elsewhere, dozens of society members lay bloodied and defeated. The remaining fighters trembled after realizing that Yuzuki had wiped them all out in such a short time. The bald man yelled at his allies to stop acting like cowards. He urged them to attack while Yuzuki was exhausted from his previous battle. If they defeated an S-class hunter, their dreams of becoming executives would finally come true. The entire group immediately became fired up. They charged toward Yuzuki at once. The fighters surrounded him and launched a coordinated attack from every direction. But before they could reach him, Yuzuki erupted in flames. The swirling inferno consumed every attacker and wiped them out instantly. Yuzuki casually appeared behind the massive man and apologized for interrupting. Then, he mockingly asked if the man had just ordered everyone to attack him at once. Yuzuki laughed directly in his face. Furious, the bald man released a tremendous surge of power. He warned Yuzuki not to look down on them. Then, he angrily called the S-class hunter an arrogant brat. The bald man activated Titan manifestation, triggering a massive explosion. His body transformed into a gigantic muscular titan that towered over the surrounding buildings. Overwhelming energy surged throughout his enormous body. Then, he stomped the ground and shattered the entire floor. Hinata braced himself as a violent shockwave tore across the battlefield. The ground collapsed beneath Hinata and Rin, sending them plunging into the darkness below. A few moments later, Hinata carried the unconscious Rin through the damaged corridors. Blood dripped from his mouth as he struggled to keep moving. When Hinata found Fugu and Masamune, he sighed in relief upon seeing that they were safe. Hinata asked if Fugu could move, but Fugu explained that Masamune still needed time to recover. Suddenly, cracks spread across the ceiling above them. Outside, the Titan roared beneath crackling lightning as it towered over the burning castle walls. Fugu and Hinata watched from a distance. Yuzuki leaped into the air as the Titan attempted to strike him from above. The Titan roared and ordered Yuzuki not to look away. Then, it swung its enormous fist with enough force to crush him. A blinding pillar of energy shot directly into the sky. The catastrophic attack, Titan Smash, exploded across the battlefield and devastated the castle grounds. The Titan arrogantly declared that even an S-class opponent couldn't survive that attack. Suddenly, Yuzuki appeared directly before it. He taunted the beast, pointing out that no matter how powerful an attack might be, it was completely meaningless if it couldn't hit its target. Countless flaming spears formed around Yuzuki. He unleashed his technique, Blazing Divine Spear. Then he immediately followed it with Myriad Flash. The Titan cursed loudly. Yuzuki's attack engulfed the massive target in a devastating explosion and obliterated it. From atop a high wall, Fugu and Hinata watched the Titan disappear within the flames. Fugu stared in awe as the enemy they couldn't even touch was defeated instantly. He called Yuzuki a monster and admitted that it was no wonder people hailed him as the hero of the next generation. Fugu turned toward Hinata after noticing his silence. Hinata admitted to himself that he might have misunderstood what it truly meant to become the elite he had always dreamed of being. After fighting through dangerous dungeons, he had started believing that he was finally strong. He thought that he had gained enough power to protect someone, but reality had proven otherwise. Hinata clenched his fist and called out to Fugu. Then, he declared that he wanted to become stronger. Fugu stared at him in surprise. Before a gentle and understanding smile appeared on his face, he agreed, admitting that this was simply how older brothers were. Then, he reminded Hinata that their journey had only just begun. Fugu encouraged him to become stronger alongside the rest of their team. Hearing those words, Hinata began to sob. The unprecedented assault by the God-slaying society finally came to an end. A later report from the Intelligence Bureau confirmed the devastating losses. 2 people were killed, 11 were injured, and 27 remained missing. Beyond the immediate casualties, the fact that the God-slaying society had deliberately targeted students sent shockwaves throughout the training institute. Even worse, authorities believed that most of the missing students had willingly defected to the God-slaying society. Inside the God-slaying society's headquarters, a massive theater screen replayed footage from the battle. The recording showed Hinata insisting that he could still fight. Yuzuki's cold response followed as he dismissed his brother as dead weight and defective trash. An unknown man watched the recording from the theater seats. He found the 2 brothers incredibly interesting. 4 months had passed since the God-slaying society's attack. Since then, the students had trained non-stop to overcome their frustration. At Training Ground B, deafening explosions echoed across the area. Fugo summoned countless stone spikes from the ground. Minato effortlessly dodged the attack. Then, he countered with a violent surge of lightning. The electricity spread across the battlefield. His attack carved a deep dent through everything in its path. As the smoke cleared, it revealed that Rin had taken the attack for Fugu. Fugu caught Rin as she staggered backward and coughed from the damage. Minato looked at the defeated group and asked if they were already finished. However, Hinata and Masamune continued fighting. Masamune charged forward. At the same time, Hinata launched a barrage of dark energy projectiles toward Minato. Minato countered with his lightning. He declared that attacks of that level would never reach him. Then he remarked that it was finally time to end the battle. Suddenly Rin appeared above him with flames gathered around her hand. Minato was shocked that she could still move after taking his attack head-on. Rin slammed Minato directly into the ground with a devastating strike. She called out to the others and ordered them to finish the battle together. Minato responded by unleashing the power of thunder. Fugu panicked as the overwhelming energy caused his entire body to resonate. Gathering dark energy, Hinata stepped in front of his teammates and ordered them to get behind him. Minato smirked and called them too slow. A massive pillar of lightning swallowed the entire group. Hinata collapsed, and his sword slipped from his hand. Minato checked his stopwatch and announced their time, 5 minutes and 18 seconds. He considered it a passing score, causing the entire group to celebrate. Minato smiled proudly after seeing how much they had grown over the past 4 months. Hinata possessed the abilities Black Blade and Shadow Stitch. He had become an all-rounder capable of freely manipulating his shadow in battle. Masamune possessed the ability Kiku Ichimonji Norimune. Her ability enhanced her natural swordsmanship, making her nearly unmatched in close and mid-range combat. Rin possessed the ability Tyrant Dragon Impact. She possessed incredible strength and toughness, allowing her to endure attacks head-on before delivering the finishing blow. Fugo possessed the ability Guardian Sage. He could use various forms of magic to support his allies and even heal minor injuries. Minato admitted that he had never expected Fugo to learn healing magic. Their earlier strategy had genuinely caught him off guard. Internally, Minato praised how solid their teamwork had become. Suddenly, a deafening alarm interrupted his thoughts. Hinata wondered if it was an emergency alert, while Fugu admitted that he had a terrible feeling. An urgent announcement echoed throughout the training center. A mysterious projectile had been launched from the Gate of Demise. All trainees were ordered to return to their stations and prepare for immediate deployment. The team gathered around a screen to watch the breaking news. The live report confirmed that a projectile had just been launched from the Gate of Demise. The news anchor reported that it had traveled approximately 90 kilometers from Shibuya before striking halfway up Mount Fuji. A field reporter named Mr. Tamura broadcast live from Yamanaka Lake near the impact site. Footage from a news helicopter showed that the projectile had struck near Mount Fuji's 7th station and was still releasing smoke. The aerial footage revealed an enormous crater at the point of impact, which had quickly transformed into a nest of creatures. A scouting team dispatched by the training center had been completely wiped out. As a result, the emergency mission was officially classified as A rank. Rin wondered what was happening. Hinata noticed that none of the creatures were leaving the crater, which Rin found incredibly unsettling. Minato stared at the screen and muttered that the situation had actually worked out perfectly. He suggested that their group accept the A-rank mission, leaving everyone stunned. Masamune asked if he seriously meant their team. Minato confirmed it and explained that he could use his authority to recommend them to the training center. She pointed out that with their current strength, accepting an A-rank mission was practically the same as walking to their deaths. Minato told them that the choice was entirely theirs. Then, he asked what they wanted to do. The group fell silent. Hinata stepped forward. Without hesitation, he declared that he wanted to accept the challenge. His determination surprised everyone. After a brief pause, Masamune, Rin, and Fugu smiled before agreeing to follow him. Minato smiled and declared that the matter had been decided. Then, he wished them good luck on their emergency mission. A few hours later, we see a dark and ominous energy swirling around the entrance. Hinata and his friends carefully inspected it. It was finally time to begin. The entire group entered the ominous cavern together. Rin and Masamune stared in surprise at what waited inside. Fugu admitted that he had expected something like this. They quickly realized that this wasn't an ordinary cave. Rin compared it to something commonly seen in an RPG, while Masamune recognized it as a labyrinth. As they walked, Fugu became lost in thought. Then he asked why everyone had joined the God King selection. Rin questioned why he had suddenly brought that up. Fugu claimed that he wanted to pass the time and added that sharing personal information was important during their first team mission. Hinata agreed that it made sense. Hinata answered first, explaining that he wanted to catch up to his younger brother, Yuzuki. He wasn't participating because he had a wish he wanted granted. Masamune revealed that she had joined purely for self-improvement. She firmly believed that someone needed to overcome brutal battlefields to become a true samurai. Then, they asked Fugo why he had joined. He casually replied that he was only doing it for the money. Rin stared at him in disbelief. Then, her expression twisted with anger. She grabbed Fugo by the shirt. Rin demanded to know if he was serious. Fugu apologized and admitted that he didn't possess a noble goal like everyone else. Hinata and Masamune tried to pull them apart. Masamune asked what was wrong with Rin, while Hinata reminded her that everyone had their own reasons. Rin called Fugu scum before finally releasing him. Hinata couldn't understand why Fugu's answer had made her so angry. She was acting completely different from usual. He wondered if something had happened in her past. Masamune told both of them to calm down. Hoping to lighten the mood, she suggested that they continue moving forward. However, Masamune wasn't watching where she was going as she told everyone to follow her. She looked down in confusion after feeling herself step on something. Suddenly, dark crystal spikes rained from the ceiling. Masamune cried out as one of them pierced her shoulder. Hinata rushed forward and caught her as she collapsed. Fugu and Rin panicked as the situation rapidly worsened. A massive horde of skeletons emerged around them. Fugu called out to Hinata and ordered everyone to retreat immediately. The group raced toward a massive set of wooden doors. Hinata followed behind them while carrying the injured Masamune on his back. They slammed the doors shut the moment Hinata made it through. Everyone stopped to catch their breath. Fugu observed that the new chamber was unusually large, while Rin noted that its atmosphere felt completely different from the previous areas. Suddenly, Hinata screamed Masamune's name. Fugu and Hinata rushed to Masamune's side, while Rin noticed how pale she had become. Fugu suspected that the spike contained poison. Hinata asked if Fugu had any experience using antidotes. Fugu admitted that he didn't, but insisted they needed to try something as he activated resonance. He instructed everyone to hold Masamune still while he removed the spike and stopped the bleeding. Fugu successfully pulled the dark spike from her shoulder. Everyone followed his instructions as Fugu placed his hand over the wound. Suddenly, a small stone fell from the ceiling. Fugu immediately froze. A low rumbling sound echoed throughout the cavern. Then, the entire chamber began shaking. An enormous creature emerged from the darkness. It was an A-class chimera. The group realized that they had entered a boss room at the worst possible time. Rin immediately declared that they needed to defeat it, but Fugo quickly stopped her. He warned that the creature was far stronger than they could imagine and completely beyond their current abilities. On top of that, they still needed to protect Masamune. Fugu urged everyone to retreat instead. Rin angrily shoved him aside and called him a money grubber. She refused to take orders from someone like him and charged directly toward the chimera. Fugu and Hinata watched in horror as she rushed forward. Fugu ordered Hinata to carry Masamune and escape. Hinata hesitated, but Fugo cut him off, arguing that it would be impossible for everyone to survive. He repeatedly urged Hinata to leave immediately. Hinata found himself trapped between two terrible choices. He couldn't decide what to do. But eventually, he reluctantly obeyed. The chimera noticed Hinata running away. Rin charged toward the roaring monster and screamed at it not to look away. With a fierce battle cry, she leaped into the air and delivered a devastating downward strike to its head. But to her shock, the attack did absolutely nothing. Before Rin could react, an enormous serpent head appeared above her. The chimera's snake tail wrapped tightly around her body, causing Fugo to scream her name. Then, the monster turned toward him. Its goat head slammed into Fugo and sent him flying. He crashed into the ground and struggled to recover. Meanwhile, the serpent tightened its grip around Rin. Then it slammed her down with tremendous force, shattering the stone floor and triggering an explosion of light and debris. Rin and Fugu could no longer move as the chimera slowly approached them. Fugu desperately crawled toward Rin and promised that he would heal her soon. Healing energy surrounded Rin's body, allowing her to stand again. She asked if Fugu had truly joined the selection only for money. Fugu admitted that she had been right. He apologized before revealing that his family was poor. Rin stared at him in confusion. Fugu explained that he wanted to earn enough money for his 4 younger brothers and 2 younger sisters to live in luxury. Relieved by his answer, Rin burst into laughter. She told Fugu that he should have explained that from the beginning. The serpent gathered a massive amount of energy inside its mouth. Suddenly, blue energy erupted from the chimera. The devastating blast exploded across the battlefield. The giant serpent hissed violently. In the next instant, a blinding flash sliced straight through it. A sword wrapped in shadows had cut through its body. Hinata stood before the chimera with blue flames surrounding him. Rin and Fugu stared up at him in shock. Burning with determination, Hinata prepared to unleash his next attack. Hinata stood protectively in front of Rin and Fugu. Fugu called out to him. Then he demanded to know why Hinata had returned. He emphasized that the chimera was far too powerful for them to defeat. Fugu urged Hinata to abandon them and escape while he still could. Hinata remained silent. Then, he answered that he wanted to become stronger. His response surprised Fugo. Hinata knew that if he ran away now, he would never grow stronger. He declared that he refused to lose anyone else. Hinata tightly clenched his fist. Dark energy surged around his body as he vowed that every one of them would survive and return home alive. The giant serpent charged directly toward him. Hinata focused his energy as the creature attempted to devour him. He desperately tried to form an image. He focused on one thought: how could he cut that monster down? Concentrated energy gathered inside his palm. Hinata slowly imagined the weapon he needed. He maintained his focus even as the serpent's fangs closed in. Then he attempted to create a curved blade polearm. The weapon materialized in his hands, allowing him to slice straight through the serpent. Fugu couldn't believe that Hinata had actually landed the attack. His success immediately fired Rin up. She reminded herself that their battle wasn't over yet. Determined to survive alongside everyone, Rin charged forward. Her aura erupted as she released a fierce battle cry. She locked onto the Chimera's goat and lion heads. Then she raised her fist and screamed. Her powerful Tyrant Dragon impact slammed directly into the target. The goat's head exploded as blood sprayed across the battlefield. The Chimera roared in agony. Hinata immediately rushed over to check on Rin. Rin smiled proudly after successfully sending the monster flying. Only one head remained. Suddenly, a sinister purple aura erupted from the Chimera. Rin noticed that its body was rapidly growing larger, leaving everyone stunned. The monster released a deafening roar as power surged throughout its body. Then, it lunged from above and swung its massive claws toward Hinata. But the creature suddenly stopped. Rin had grabbed its tail and held it back. Then, she lifted the massive Chimera into the air and screamed that she would smash it to pieces. With tremendous strength, Rin swung the monster and slammed it into the ground. She landed gracefully after the attack, but the Chimera immediately retaliated, crushing Rin into the floor with its enormous paw. The beast was about to finish the job, but then Hinata rushed forward and placed himself between them. The giant beast roared with murderous intent before attacking. Gritting his teeth, Hinata braced himself for the impact. Dark shadows erupted from his body, and their power continued growing. Suddenly, an immense three-stage thrust intercepted the Chimera's attack. 3 powerful strikes slammed into the monster. Hinata looked behind him in surprise. He was stunned to see Masamune standing again while Fugu healed her. Fugu announced that the detoxification was finally complete. Masamune smiled weakly and entrusted the rest of the battle to Hinata. Hinata nodded before drawing his sword. He refused to waste the opportunity his teammates had created. Purple energy gathered around his blade. Hinata leaped high above the monster. He gripped his sword tightly with both hands. Then, he struck with everything he had. The Chimera released a deafening roar. Hinata's powerful slash tore straight through the enemy. The beast screamed as its enormous body split apart. Rin, Masamune, and Fugo watched in shock. The Chimera collapsed, split cleanly in 2. The battle was finally over. They had won. Everyone erupted in cheers. Fugo laughed and admitted that he could barely remain standing. The entire group collapsed onto the ground, exhausted but victorious. As they rested inside the glowing cavern, Fugu suggested that they continue working together even after graduating from the Hunter Training Institute. His proposal caught everyone by surprise. Hinata smiled and agreed. The 4 friends brought their fists together and promised to always remain by one another's side. At the Hunter Training Institute headquarters, a conference room had been reserved for the regular S-Class Hunter meeting. Inside the dimly lit room, the atmosphere was tense as several people with intimidating auras sat around the table. Minato, the rank 1 S-Class Hunter, excitedly pointed out that his special class had defeated an A-Class entity less than half a year after its creation. Hitomi Fuzaki, the rank 4 S-Class Hunter, bluntly told him to stop talking to her. Heisuke Tawaraya, the rank 6 S-Class Hunter, expressed his surprise. He never expected Minato to possess actual talent as an instructor. Haru Jinguji, the rank 3 S-Class Hunter, smiled and called it wonderful to see promising young talents grow. However, she added that whether they reached their full potential would ultimately depend on their commander's skill. Tsurumaru Fuwa, the rank 2 S-Class Hunter, offered no comment. Nana Aisaji, the rank 7 S-Class Hunter, questioned whether Minato was forcing his trainees through reckless training. She warned him not to create more work for the medical bureau. Yuzuki smiled and claimed that he was happy to see his brother performing well. Heisuke then remembered that Hinata Kamio was Yuzuki's older brother. Heisuke noted that Hinata had originally been an F-Class Hunter and called his growth a massive leap. Nana was equally impressed by how much the other students had improved in only a few months. Heisuke happily declared that youth was truly wonderful, while Nana looked forward to their future achievements. Everyone continued praising the special class. Meanwhile, Yuzuki quietly burned with jealousy. He was shocked and furious that Hinata's team had defeated an A-class entity. Yuzuki couldn't believe that his older brother had accomplished something like that. Hinata was supposed to be a dropout, a useless failure, and an inferior student. Yet now, his older brother was receiving praise from the strongest S-class hunters. Then, the official meeting began. After hearing the first report, Todo asked if their previous discussion had covered the countermeasures against the creatures. He then shifted the meeting toward the recent movements of the God-killing society. Fuzaki reported that all enemy activity had completely stopped after the attack on the Institute. Heisuke found their sudden silence unsettling, while Jinguji hoped it wasn't merely the calm before the storm. Nana asked if the other branches had discovered anything. Fuzaki revealed that the Hokkaido branch had recently submitted surveillance footage. The hunters watched the recording and noticed two cloaked figures on the screen. The footage zoomed in on their backs, revealing a distinct emblem alongside the word monothyma. Nana recognized the insignia and confirmed that it belonged to the God-killing society. Yuzuki wondered why they would walk around in public wearing such obvious clothing. Heisuke replied that their enemies weren't stupid, meaning it was probably a trap. Jinguji agreed that it looked like an invitation from the God-killing society and asked Director Todo how they should respond. Todo didn't care that it was a trap and decided to accept their invitation. With overwhelming military force, they could simply crush both the trap and everyone behind it. He asked Minato, the rank 1 S-class hunter, if he agreed. Caught off guard, Minato immediately refused. He complained that his vacation started the next day and that he hated the cold. His childish response left everyone speechless. Minato suggested sending Tsurumaru instead. Fuzaki yelled at Tsurumaru to wake up because they were discussing him. Jinguji found it pathetic that this group represented the Institute's strongest force, while Tawaraya laughed loudly. Eventually, Minato agreed to go. However, he insisted on bringing his students along. Todo gave up arguing and told Minato to do whatever he wanted. Meanwhile, in another setting, an airplane landed in Hokkaido. Fugu panicked and demanded to know where they were. Beside him, Hinata shivered uncontrollably from the cold. Minato arrived in a rental car and called them over. The students demanded to know why he had brought them to such a freezing place. Minato urged them to enter the vehicle first and assured them that he had prepared warm clothes. A white SUV drove across the snowy landscape. Inside, Minato noted that although they had trained together for months, they had never spent time together privately. So, he had come up with an idea to bring them closer. Minato enthusiastically announced a 2-day, 1-night bonding trip to experience everything Hokkaido offered. Hinata immediately knew that he was lying. Minato asked if this was their first time in Hokkaido. Hinata admitted that they had never even traveled outside the Kanto region. For their generation, school trips had been canceled because of the Gate of Demise. Instead of traveling, students were taken on tours of nearby factories. Fugo sheepishly admitted that he was actually becoming excited about the trip. Minato cheered and promised to teach them how to enjoy the snowy country properly. Their first activity was snowboarding, which Minato was incredibly good at. Meanwhile, Hinata and Fugo struggled to remain upright on their skis. Later, they rode a cable car, enjoyed local snacks, and posed beside a historic statue. The group visited a famous clock tower before changing into traditional clothing and taking commemorative photos indoors. As the sun set, they relaxed at a traditional inn and enjoyed dinner together. Later that night, Hinata and Fugu slept peacefully. Meanwhile, Minato studied several maps on his phone. Hinata suddenly woke and found Minato already fully dressed. Minato casually asked if they should head out soon. Hinata asked where they were going. Minato smiled and revealed that they were heading directly toward the God-killing society's location. They immediately set out. Minato grabbed both students and leapt across the snowy landscape. Fugo panicked and demanded to know where their instructor was taking them. Minato repeated that they were visiting the God-killing society. According to headquarters, the location was most likely a trap. Hinata became alarmed and asked why they were willingly walking into it. Minato explained that as hunters, they needed to investigate the location directly. The two students could only endure the insane journey. Eventually, Minato announced that they had arrived. Hinata and Fugo collapsed into the snow from exhaustion. Then, Hinata noticed something ahead. A bloody, severed hand lay on the ground. Both students stared at it in horror. A mysterious man with scales covering his face greeted them. Standing atop a massive pile of slaughtered monsters with 2 blades in his hands, the stranger told Minato that he was late. The pile consisted entirely of high-ranking creatures, including an A-class Jack Frost and a B-class Wendigo. Hinata was stunned that one person had defeated so many powerful monsters by himself. The man jumped down from the pile and explained that he had grown tired of waiting, so he decided to play with the local creatures. Unfortunately, slaughtering weaklings like them hadn't excited him at all. 2 hooded figures appeared beside the man as he expressed hope that Minato and his students would provide better entertainment. Fugo immediately recognized the crest on their cloaks. It was the symbol of the God-Killing Society, the crest of unified intent. Minato decided to treat the encounter as part of their extracurricular training. He told Fugo and Hinata to relax, for now they only needed to watch. The enemy carefully studied Minato. Then he decided to challenge the strongest hunter alone. Minato laughed and asked whether the man was truly confident or simply had no idea who he was. The stranger replied that he knew exactly who stood before him. Calling Minato the world's strongest hunter, the enemy unleashed a freezing barrier technique. It was called the Garden of 8 Cold Hells. Ice instantly swept across the battlefield. Hinata and Fugu cried out in alarm, but Minato simply smiled to reassure them. A massive spire of ice erupted from the snowy battlefield. Minato became trapped inside a cage of ice. The enemy wondered why Minato had allowed himself to be captured so easily. A hunter with his abilities should have escaped without any trouble. He revealed that his contractor was Kurao Kami no Kami, the dragon god who ruled over ice and snow. Inside a snowy country, he could unleash his abilities at their absolute limit. The temperature within his barrier had already dropped to minus 60 degrees. At that temperature, Minato would freeze to death within minutes. Ice had already begun covering his feet. Minato noticed the rapidly falling temperature and realized that remaining inside the barrier for too long would be dangerous. Meanwhile, the man stood beside his ice dragon. He didn't mind waiting for Minato to freeze, but he also recognized that fighting the strongest hunter was a rare opportunity. He wondered how capable Minato truly was if the chairman considered him a serious threat. And he was determined to find out. The man swung his sword and unleashed a swarm of ice dragons. Minato gathered energy inside his hand and remarked that he rarely paid attention to anyone below the society's boss and executives. The man laughed maniacally after realizing that Minato had been ignoring him. The disrespect completely infuriated him. Gathering even more power, he decided to teach Minato that his arrogance could become the cause of his defeat. He unleashed a massive, swirling tornado of ice toward his opponent. Minato observed that the enemy was once again trying to overpower him through a direct attack. Minato fired a concentrated energy beam and mocked his opponent for lacking finesse. The beam completely overwhelmed the tornado and tore through the blizzard. Minato smiled confidently. Suddenly, the enemy appeared behind him and whispered that the same criticism applied to Minato. Caught off guard, Minato wondered when his opponent had managed to get behind him. The figure he had blasted shattered into fragments, revealing that it had only been an ice clone. At that moment, the real enemy attacked from above. He brought his broadsword crashing down, and Minato barely managed to block it. The impact shattered the surrounding ice and sent Minato flying. The frost around Minato continued spreading across his arms. Soon, a wall of ice completely encased him. His opponent declared that Minato's time was up. The man laughed and called his victory surprisingly anticlimactic. Inside that frozen space, he possessed an overwhelming advantage. But Minato interrupted him, explaining that he had only been waiting to see if the enemy possessed a secret plan. He shattered the ice around his boots and admitted that his opponent's ability wasn't particularly interesting. The enemy stared in disbelief, unable to understand how Minato could still move freely in such extreme cold. Minato asked if he truly hadn't noticed anything. A drop of water landed on the man's face. Only then did he realize that the ice around them was melting. Minato revealed that his contractor was Zeus, the king of gods. Even before becoming God King, Zeus had ruled over the sky. That authority gave Minato absolute control over the weather, including ice and snow. Immense energy erupted from his body. The enemy trembled in terror and called him a monster. Minato unleashed final thunder judgment, calling down a colossal pillar of crackling energy. The devastating explosion carved an enormous crater into the snowy battlefield. Hinata and Fugu rushed toward Minato in relief. Hinata asked if the battle was over. Minato confirmed that it was, admitting that his opponent had required slightly more effort than expected. Even so, the enemy had ultimately been no match for him. Hinata and Fugu stared in awe at the power of the rank 1 S-class hunter. Minato then turned toward the remaining enemies and demanded to know what the underlings planned to do next. He was honestly surprised that they had watched the entire battle without interfering. Without warning, the two figures counterattacked. Several energy blasts rained toward them. Minato quickly grabbed Hinata and Fugu before pulling them out of danger. As the dust settled, Minato realized that these weren't ordinary underlings. He suspected they might actually be stronger than the opponent he had just defeated. The two figures removed their robes and revealed their true bodies. Hinata and Fugu were stunned to discover that their attackers weren't even human. Suddenly, Minato had an idea. He cheerfully tagged both students into the battle, leaving Hinata and Fugu completely confused. Minato believed that an extracurricular lesson would be boring if they only watched. It was time to move on to practical combat. He challenged Hinata and Fugu to test their current abilities against enemies of that level. Both students immediately became nervous. Hinata steeled himself. Then, both students accepted the order and prepared for battle alongside their contractors. Dark energy surged around Hinata as he told himself to remain calm. He resolved to unleash everything he and Kuroyasha had built together. Minato warned that if they lost to enemies of this level, he would never bring them on another God-killing society mission. They would only become a hindrance. Then, he asked if they were prepared. Hinata and Fugu readied themselves as the dark, glowing enemies loomed before them. The battle began. One enemy released a surge of dark energy. Its arm transformed into a massive, multi-barreled cannon. Hinata stared in surprise. The creature unleashed a barrage of energy blasts across the battlefield. Explosions erupted throughout the snowy plain. The resulting snowstorm completely blocked Hinata's vision. Suddenly, the dark creature leaped through the swirling snow and attacked. Hinata jumped sideways and narrowly avoided the strike. Meanwhile, Fugu grew frustrated because he felt that the enemies were mocking them. Hinata observed the widespread destruction and worried that the creatures intended to turn the entire area into a wasteland. The enemy closed the distance and continued its relentless assault. Hinata could barely defend himself. Fugu screamed Hinata's name as the second monster suddenly towered over him. He raised his massive lance and blocked its descending attack. Then, the other creature's multi-barreled cannon struck Fugu directly and drew blood. A powerful explosion swept across the battlefield and cleared the surrounding snow. The two monsters looked around in confusion. Hinata and Fugu hid behind nearby trees and carefully observed them. Fugu noticed how well the monsters coordinated, while Hinata realized that they weren't acting purely on instinct. The creatures constantly covered each other's blind spots, leaving almost no openings. They were clearly cooperating. Fugu grew increasingly stressed after realizing that their enemies possessed both overwhelming attack power and genuine intelligence. He knew it was only a matter of time before the creatures found them. They couldn't win a long-range shootout, so they needed to force the enemy into close combat. However, charging directly into two powerful opponents would be incredibly dangerous. Fugu covered his mouth as his mind raced for a solution. Frustrated, Fugu punched a nearby tree. The impact knocked a large pile of snow from its branches and buried Hinata beneath it. Fugu immediately apologized while Hinata stared at him in disbelief. Then, an idea suddenly entered Hinata's mind. He told Fugu that there was something he wanted to try. The two monsters stood together in the snow. Suddenly, they heard someone calling out to them. They turned and saw Hinata approaching. Hinata pointed his sword toward them and openly issued a challenge. The monsters immediately entered their combat stances. One transformed its arm into a long cannon, then it fired a powerful energy beam. A violent shockwave exploded across the battlefield. Hinata immediately leaped away and taunted the creature. The monsters took the bait and chased after him. The ranged creature continued firing beams. Hinata narrowly avoided each incoming blast. Meanwhile, the monster wielding the spear continued pursuing him. It struck Hinata's weapon and knocked it away. Hinata counterattacked, forcing the monster to move sideways, but the creature grabbed him and slammed him onto the ground. Both monsters loomed over him. Unleashing his dark energy, Hinata shouted for Fugu. Magic circles appeared across the snowy landscape. Fugu descended through the glowing glyphs and declared that he no longer cared what happened next. The magic circles scattered around the area exploded. The monsters looked upward in surprise. A massive avalanche suddenly thundered down the mountain. Fugu anxiously watched the approaching snow and wondered if Hinata would truly be okay. Earlier, he had been shocked when Hinata suggested triggering an avalanche and burying himself alongside the enemies. Hinata had explained that it was a reliable way to put both monsters out of commission, but Fugu remained hesitant about the incredibly dangerous plan. As he stared at the snow, Fugu wondered how Hinata could suggest something so insane despite his normally quiet personality. Perhaps the guy simply didn't feel fear. Back to the present time, Hinata thanked Fugu. As the avalanche settled, Hinata moved through the buried battlefield. Now that the enemies were trapped, he could finally fight them at close range. Hinata swung his sword. Using mastery of all martial arts, he cut down the enemies with one decisive strike from his odachi. Fugu immediately erupted in celebration. Their plan had succeeded, and the two exchanged a high five. Fugu admitted that the entire strategy had nearly scared him to death. Suddenly, something loomed behind Hinata. He turned and saw a mutated monster lunging toward him with its enormous jaws wide open. Before it could strike, several spikes pierced straight through its body and sprayed blood everywhere. Minato had intervened and declared that the battle had gone far enough. He praised Hinata and Fugu for defeating opponents stronger than themselves. Then, he crushed the monster's core. Fugu stared at him in surprise. Minato silently examined the creature for a moment. Then, he suggested heading back, while Fugu complained about how exhausting the battle had been. Behind them, a single eye remained open within the monster's shattered remains. Eventually, the video feed completely cut out. Inside a dark room, a woman noticed that the transmission had ended and concluded that all their reconnaissance units had been killed. The man sitting upon the throne apologized to Yuto for using her underlings in an armed reconnaissance mission. Yuto laughed, claiming that those talentless fools should feel honored to have been useful. To her, that batch of underlings had been nothing but fragile and boring trash, suited only for spying. The truly powerful demons were still waiting for their turn. Yuto Hayaki was an executive of the God-Killing Society contracted with Solomon. Yuto knelt before her lord and asked if the boy had caught his attention. The man admitted that he liked the boy very much. A mysterious smile spread across his face. He expressed his desire to meet Hinata and speak with him personally. After that mission, a few months have passed, and now we see a man running through the city streets while desperately calling for help. 3 magic hounds chased after him, with the largest creature lunging forward. Before it could strike, a purple energy beam descended from above and sliced it in half. Hinata held off the remaining hounds and ordered the man to run. The terrified civilian immediately fled. Rin called out to Hinata as she, Mikumari Fugu, and Ibu Masamune joined the battle. Working together, the group quickly eliminated the remaining hounds. Hinata asked if the mission was truly only C rank, but Fugu admitted that he had no idea. Frustrated, Fugu remembered their previous dungeon experience and complained that their instructor's directions were always so half-assed. Minato had simply ordered them to eliminate the magic hounds and defeat the boss hiding somewhere within the city. Masamune called out to Hinata and Fugu, warning them that the pack had begun moving north. Fugu decided there was no point complaining anymore, and the group immediately moved out. As they traveled through the city, a deafening crash suddenly stopped them. They discovered another group fighting a massive pack of magic hounds alongside an enormous ice golem. Fugu wondered if they belonged to a detached squad from the Institute. However, if that were true, the students should have received a briefing beforehand. Without hesitation, Masamune declared that they needed to help and charged toward the battle. Rin sighed at her impatience but followed anyway. A summoner casting spells from a glowing magic book noticed the team fighting the hounds. He informed his older brother, who clicked his tongue and called the newcomers a swarm of annoying flies. A blonde swordsman stepped forward and confronted the 4 students. He declared that the area belonged to him and ordered them not to interfere. Confused by the sudden hostility, Fugu demanded to know what the man was talking about. The swordsman dismissed them as clueless rookies and warned that they needed to learn how things worked in places like this. But before he could finish his threat, a sudden scream interrupted him. A wounded man cried out for help as a hound brutally sank its teeth into him. The female archer remarked on the mess while Fugu questioned whether they intended to help him. The woman merely grinned. Meanwhile, the summoner replied that he didn't know the man and claimed only an idiot would get caught so easily. He added that the porter had nobody to blame but himself for being weak. Hinata immediately intervened and killed the hound, while Masamune caught the injured man. The students gathered around him and asked if he was okay. The man repeatedly apologized to them. Despite his injuries, the porter insisted that he was fine. Hinata found it cruel that the others had abandoned him while he was covered in wounds. Masamune quickly asked Fugo to treat him, and Fugu immediately began healing his injuries. The summoner yelled at them to stop acting independently, but the blonde swordsman raised one hand and silenced him. The swordsman remarked that even useless trash like that boy remained an important porter. Since the students had volunteered to treat him, his group would gladly leave the porter in their care. Later, the group took shelter inside a convenience store. While Fugo treated the injured man, Hinata asked who those people were. The man nervously adjusted his glasses, unsure how to answer. Rin stepped forward and identified them as the unaffiliated candidates. Hinata asked if she knew them. Rin replied that she knew their kind far too well. She explained that they lacked the sense of justice needed to fight for others at the institute. The wounded man grew anxious beneath the intensity of her words as she added that they also lacked the courage to clash with candidates from the God-killing society. Furious, Rin called them fence-sitters who only acted for money. She screamed in frustration upon realizing that people like them were still around. Masamune tried to calm Rin and suggested taking out her anger on the creatures instead. Meanwhile, Fugu wondered what had gotten into her. At that moment, Beowulf apologized for Rin's aggressive behavior. Hinata was surprised to see him. Beowulf assumed that Rin would never explain the reason herself, so he decided that it would be better if he told them. Meanwhile, Masamune watched from a nearby ledge as Rin aggressively charged into battle. Beowulf began revealing Rin's painful past. Years earlier, Rin visited an aquarium with her family. The young Rin excitedly pointed toward a fish and remarked that it looked delicious. Her mother laughed and praised her, while the surrounding visitors stared in disbelief. Rin's mother held her and jokingly called her way of enjoying an aquarium completely ridiculous. She carried Rin closer to the tank and explained that being a glutton wasn't enough. A young girl also needed to show compassion toward the little fish. Then, she noticed her daughter's expression suddenly change and asked what was wrong. Rin silently pointed toward the glass. An enormous and terrifying creature had appeared inside the aquarium tank directly above them. The glass suddenly shattered. After swallowing a large amount of water, Rin could barely remain conscious. Her mother desperately screamed her name. The enormous monster trapped Rin's mother beneath its heavy body. Rin stood frozen before the creature and called out to her. Pinned beneath the beast, her mother tried to reassure Rin that she was okay. Then, she desperately begged her daughter to run. Rin panicked and promised that she would find help immediately. Her mother watched Rin flee across the flooded floor and whispered that everything would be fine as long as her daughter survived. Then, the monster opened its massive jaws. Rin sprinted through the water as quickly as possible, desperately calling for help. Eventually, she found two men standing near a row of fish tanks. Rin shouted to get their attention. The men turned in surprise after realizing that she was only a child. Rin grabbed one of them and desperately begged for his help. Pointing into the distance, she cried that her mother was injured. Rin repeatedly begged them to hurry, but the two men only stared at her. Then they grinned. The men burst into cruel laughter. Blood and corpses covered the ground around them. The men claimed they were too busy with an important job to help her as they continued stealing valuables from the victims' bodies. They told Rin to bring money the next time she wanted their help. Rin stood frozen while clutching a bloodied necklace. At that moment, she realized that her mother was gone and broke down in tears. The two men approached her. One kicked Rin onto the ground before tearing the necklace from her hand and abandoning her. Rin lay helplessly among the shattered glass. As her consciousness faded, she quietly apologized to her mother. After hearing the story, Hinata and Fugo finally understood what Rin had experienced. Beowulf warned them to remain careful and never mention that painful subject around her. Fugo now understood why Rin had reacted so strongly after hearing that he joined the selection for money. Suddenly, a voice called out to Hinata and Fugo. Both of them immediately turned toward the source. A massive pack of magic hounds swarmed the city streets. Hinata wondered how they could possibly handle such overwhelming numbers. Even so, he knew they had no choice but to fight. Suddenly, the blonde man arrived with his group and asked if they needed assistance. He admitted that the horde was also too large for his team to handle alone. Extending his hand, the man claimed they shared the same desire to protect the city's peace. He suggested putting aside their differences and fighting together. Fugo stepped forward and demanded to know why their group was there. The blonde man replied that he didn't mind explaining. Then he drew his sword and asked if they truly had time for pointless questions. Fugo and Hinata immediately prepared for combat, but the swordsman pointed his blade toward a nearby street where civilians screamed as a magic hound attacked them. Hinata realized that these people must have failed to evacuate in time. He activated mastery of all martial arts as powerful dark purple energy surged around him. Leaping high into the air, Hinata formed his great bow and fired a piercing energy blast that tore straight through the hound. He ordered Rin and Masamune to block the enemies approaching from behind. Meanwhile, Fugu warned the other group that he still didn't trust them and that their alliance was only temporary. The summoner called Fugu an arrogant brat for acting tough. However, the blonde man told him to stop complaining and try getting along. Both groups agreed that cooperation was necessary until they eliminated the invading creatures. Moments later, Fugu ordered Hinata to handle the civilian evacuation, and Hinata immediately accepted. As another massive horde charged forward, someone yelled to Fugu that they weren't making any progress. Fugu replied that they had no other choice. While they desperately held back the horde, Minerva remarked that defeating countless minions was completely pointless. As long as they didn't kill the leader, the hellhounds would continue spawning endlessly. Fugu yelled that she should have mentioned that sooner. Minerva dismissed his complaint and pointed out that Minato had already told them. Hearing this caused Masamune and Rin to remember their earlier briefing. Minato had cheerfully ordered them to defeat the leader hiding somewhere in the city. Naturally, his incredibly vague instructions had left everyone confused. Back in the present, Fugu complained that Minato always left out far too much important information. Meanwhile, Masamune pointed out that even if they knew their target, they still needed to break through the horde. At that moment, the blonde man stepped forward while releasing intense killing intent. He poured energy into his sword and unleashed a devastating slash. The attack ripped through the street and instantly eliminated countless hellhounds. It even split the ground apart. The students realized that the man's strength far surpassed that of an ordinary B-class hunter. As a fiery aura surrounded him, they concluded that he possessed at least A-class power. Despite their massive losses, even more hellhounds continued advancing. The summoner remarked that the hounds still wanted more, while the blonde man calmly prepared another attack. Suddenly, Rin noticed a horrifying scene farther down the street. A terrified young boy was trapped inside a car, while ravenous hellhounds clawed at the vehicle and tried smashing through its windows. She immediately yelled for the swordsman to wait because someone was still there. The blonde man responded with a cold glare. Then, a massive energy blast tore through the street. The attack sliced through vehicles and buildings, leaving everyone stunned. To everyone's shock, Masamune stepped forward and blocked the strike. She demanded to know what the blonde man thought he was doing. Blood ran down Masamune's face as she furiously screamed that he had deliberately refused to stop his sword. He had almost killed an innocent person. The summoner slapped her and claimed they should be grateful his group hadn't used them as decoys. Meanwhile, the female archer argued that nobody had time to worry about strangers in a situation like this. Appalled, Fugu demanded to know what the summoner had just said. The man smirked and replied that weaklings had nobody but themselves to blame. The archer insisted that she was only stating the truth, immediately angering Rin. As Rin demanded to know if she wanted a fight, Hinata stepped between them and ordered everyone to stop. Hinata demanded an explanation while holding everyone back. This wasn't the time for them to fight among themselves. The blonde man agreed that neither side would gain anything from fighting there and claimed everyone should understand that. He extended his hand and suggested that they proceed peacefully. Eventually, the other group walked away. Rin cursed loudly. She complained about how infuriating they were and demanded to know who they thought they were. Based on everything Hinata had heard, he understood why their behavior had upset her so much. Fugu then demanded to know what Hinata was doing, pointing out that he had returned with the low-level man wearing glasses. Hinata tried to explain what had happened. Earlier, Hinata had stood beside an evacuation gate and reassured a distressed couple that they were safe. He promised that he would find their missing child as well. As Hinata prepared to leave, the man with glasses chased after him. Hinata noticed him approaching. The man offered to help with the search. He leaned against Hinata and apologized, explaining that his contractor was extremely temperamental and refused to resonate whenever they were in a bad mood. Hinata sympathized with how difficult that sounded. As they walked, the man explained that his physical strength was below average without resonance, causing everyone to look down on him. Hinata asked if he belonged to the violent group from earlier. The man denied it and explained that they had only hired him to carry their luggage. Fugu questioned why Hinata had gone out of his way to bring him along. Looking back at them, Masamune remarked that all kinds of people existed, even among the unaffiliated candidates. Suddenly, the group discovered their target. Standing before them was the leader of the Hellhounds, the enormous beast known as Hellhound Garm. The other group stepped forward and claimed the boss for themselves. They ordered the younger candidates to handle the minions. Rin became irritated by their attitude, but Fugo stopped her and told her to ignore them. Surrounded by an enormous horde, Fugao ordered everyone to protect one another's blind spots. Hinata immediately agreed as they prepared for battle. A hellhound charged forward. Hinata met it head-on and killed it with one strike. The entire battlefield erupted into chaos. Rin and Fugao fought side by side as they tore through the horde. Meanwhile, Masamune sliced apart every monster that approached her. Eventually, the fighting died down. Masamune sheathed her sword and observed that almost every minion had disappeared, meaning the boss had likely been defeated. The others agreed and decided to head back. An eerie silence settled over the city as the entire pack of monsters vanished without a trace. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the street and caught Hinata's attention. The man with glasses confronted the other group and shouted that stealing was wrong. They had looted a nearby store. Rin saw them proudly displaying the jewelry they had stolen. The sight dragged Rin back into her traumatic memories. She remembered the cruel men who had mocked and abandoned her while robbing the dead, causing her entire body to tremble. Their laughter echoed through her mind and fed her growing rage. Unable to endure it any longer, Rin released a furious roar as violent red energy exploded around her. Hinata called out to Rin and desperately ordered her to stop, but she charged forward without hesitation. Wrapped in raging flames, Rin leaped high into the air. Then she crashed down and unleashed a fiery explosion upon impact. Fugu watched the destruction in horror and realized that Rin had completely lost control. The blonde man remarked that it was such a shame. He had genuinely hoped to maintain a cooperative relationship with them. Meanwhile, the summoner called forth an enormous ice golem. The swordsman studied the 4 students and concluded that handling 3 candidates while Rin rampaged would be far too troublesome. So, he decided to separate them and force everyone into one-on-one battles. Hinata realized that they were planning something, but before anyone could react, the archer grabbed Masamune and declared that she would take her. Hinata and Fugu shouted in shock as the woman sped away with Masamune. Fugu attempted to chase them, but the summoner carried him away using an enormous bird-like creature. Hinata screamed Fugo's name in panic. Suddenly, the blonde swordsman declared that he would become Hinata's opponent. A summoned lizard-like creature wrapped its tail around Hinata and dragged him away. Left behind, the man with glasses looked around in complete confusion. The blonde man apologized and explained that the terms of their agreement had changed. The porter stared in horror as the swordsman revealed that they would use him as a decoy. Behind him, the berserk Rin slowly approached. Hinata desperately struggled to break free while screaming at Rin to stop. She raised her enormous claw above the defenseless man. The porter trembled uncontrollably. Then, Rin struck. The sheer force of the fighting shook the surrounding area as another intense battle began. Masamune groaned in pain. She flew through the air and crashed violently into the pavement. After looking around, the archer decided that they were finally far enough away. Masamune leaped high into the air, drew her sword, and unleashed a powerful strike. The archer effortlessly dodged as Masamune's heavy slash split a garbage container apart. Gritting her teeth, Masamune pivoted and unleashed a rapid barrage of energy slashes. But the archer continued avoiding every attack with incredible speed. She successfully countered, pinning Masamune to the ground and stepping on her blade. Desperate to escape, Masamune begged the woman to move aside because she needed to hurry. The archer mockingly asked if Masamune was truly that worried about her friend. Given how completely rage had consumed Rin, feeling anxious was only natural. After all, Rin might kill a defenseless civilian. The possibility horrified Masamune. Masamune managed to break free and forced the woman backward with a swift maneuver. Pointing her sword forward, she declared that she had no choice but to use absolute force if the archer refused to move. The woman claimed she didn't mind if Masamune tried running away. However, she questioned whether Masamune was even capable of escaping. Suddenly, the archer lunged forward with incredible speed. She unleashed a barrage of attacks while revealing that her contractor was Atalanta. She was the fastest hunter in Greek mythology. Masamune suffered several wounds and desperately wondered what she should do. Then, she noticed something behind her. The archer laughed after realizing that her opponent was actually running away. She mocked Masamune for turning their battle into hide-and-seek after they had already played tag. Masamune fled into an underground passage. Eventually, the archer followed and cornered her underground. She continued mocking Masamune for running away. Certain of her victory, the archer charged forward and prepared to blast Masamune directly in the face. Since her opponent was a hunter, Masamune asked if she knew a particular saying. Then Masamune swung her sword and declared that nothing was more terrifying than a wounded beast. The woman realized that Masamune had been aiming for this exact moment all along. She watched in horror as the attack rushed toward her. Her eyes widened when the incoming slashes completely sealed off every escape route. The overwhelming attack erupted from the tunnel entrance. After defeating the archer, Masamune immediately rushed back toward Rin and promised that she would arrive soon. High above the city, Fugu was carried through the sky by an enormous bird-like creature. He demanded to know how far the summoner intended to take him. Fugao asked if the man was even listening, but the summoner angrily told him to stop yapping. While carrying the stolen valuables, the summoner complained about how troublesome everything had become. He was especially annoyed that he had been forced to carry all their cargo. Furious, Fugu called him a bald, petty thief who lacked the courage to fight him directly. He added that the summoner was clearly the lowest-ranked bottom feeder in his group. The man became irritated and muttered that he finally understood. Suddenly, his summoned creature changed direction. It carried Fugu even higher through the clouds. The summoner explained that he had originally intended to play around and kill time, but he had changed his mind. Then, he told Fugu to die. The creature released him. A malicious grin spread across the summoner's face. But as Fugu fell, he mocked the old man for being so cold-hearted. The summoner stared in surprise. Fugu activated a binding spell that connected them and warned the man to remain with him until the very end. The summoner panicked as the spell dragged him into the fall, realizing that Fugu intended to take him down as well. Fugu then secured himself to the flying creature, leaving the man stunned. He apologized and joked that he had no interest in going on a date with another man. The summoner cursed furiously as he plummeted toward the city below. Watching him fall, Fugu ordered the man not to dismiss the summoned bird until he safely reached the ground. Then, he climbed onto its back. Suddenly, an explosion erupted from the city below. Fugu wondered if Hinata had caused it. Meanwhile, Hinata found himself in serious trouble. His opponent stood before him with a confident smile and a blazing red sword. Alright, that's it for today's story. If you want the weekly chapter updates for this series, those will now be uploaded on my second channel, Manhwa Updater. So if you don't want to miss what happens next, make sure to check it out and join the update gang. Thanks for watching, stay cool, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.